Narrative text establishes that a specific name consistently evokes the same reaction from everyone who hears it. A man with light brown hair asks for the identity of the person being discussed. While someone speculates the name belongs to a childhood neighbor, the woman in the teal dress clarifies that her acquaintance had a different name. A heavy step sounds as the narration explains that the woman, Eisel, was not a widely known person. As another step sounds, a white-haired woman in a red gown is seen waiting in a lavish office. A portrait reveals the elegant appearance of a woman with long white hair and vibrant red eyes. A stern man with silver hair and golden eyes is introduced wearing an ornate dark cloak. With several steady steps sounding, the man enters and informs his guests that he usually rejects all requests for meetings. The white-haired woman acknowledges his reputation for being unapproachable. The silver-haired man is identified as Archduke Karl Georg Byron. Chibi-style Eisel laughs as she explains she sought him out because he is far too important to be met by chance. Chibi-style Carl looks on with a confused expression at her strange comparison. White-haired woman rests her hand clad in a black lace glove upon the table. Carl remains silent and stoic as he observes his mysterious visitor. A soft step sounds as the white-haired woman prepares to officially introduce herself. She introduces herself as Eisel Latanya Spencer, but Carl admits the name is entirely unfamiliar to him. Eisel remains calm, stating she fully expected that he would not remember her. Carl experiences a sudden annoyed twitch as he internally questions if he truly should have remembered her. He reiterates that he has never heard the name Spencer before. A thoughtful hum sounds as Carl falls into a deep brooding while a chibi-style Eisel giggles at his serious face. Eisel claims that her specific name and family history are irrelevant to their current business. A quick tap-tap sounds from her fingers as she emphasizes that the most important thing is their current meeting. She points out that the only thing that matters is that he has finally come to see her. Carl coldly informs her that his schedule is filled with restructuring the army and the knights. He admits he only met her to see the face of someone so persistent, while she cheekily asks how it feels to finally see the person who annoyed him. A weary sigh sounds as Carl exhales in response to her boldness. Eisel responds to his exasperation with a wide, bright grin. Archduke Karl Georg Byron finds it hard to believe that someone could smile so cheerfully in his intimidating presence. Night falls over the Grand Palace, where the Archduke's stern nature is known to make everyone, including royalty, feel uncomfortable. Despite his dashing looks and muscular physique, his cold aura leaves most women terrified and unable to approach him. Looking at his busy state, Eisel playfully asks if he is too occupied to even share tea. A light giggle sounds as she finds his rigid and busy nature understandable. Eisel directly asks for his help, but Carl sharply questions if she ignored his previous statement about being busy. She glances at him and promises that she will provide a fair repayment for his assistance. A thoughtful hum sounds as a hand rhythmically taps against the surface of the table. Another quick tap sounds as Carl silently considers the woman's offer. With a sharp glance, Carl asks her to specify exactly what kind of assistance she requires. Eisel beams and explains her plan might cause a stir, as even a small mistake could be seen as an act of treason. Carl's brow furrows in a frown as he asks her to explain the meaning behind such a dangerous claim. The beautiful white-haired woman continues to smile serenely. Carl clicks his tongue in a sharp tisk as he reflects on the severe, multi-generational consequences of planning a revolt. He wonders if she truly expects him to become an accomplice in such a high-stakes crime. He dismisses her request as nonsense and asks if she is genuinely inviting him to lead a treasonous plot. Eisel smiles inwardly, noting that his predictable reaction is exactly what she had anticipated. The woman looks on with a steady and knowing gaze in her red eyes. The crest of House Byron represents a family famous for 5 centuries of unwavering loyalty and an inflexible demeanor. Narrative text explains that asking a man of his background to rebel is the same as asking him to kill her immediately. Eisel clarifies that she isn't asking him to take charge of a revolt, but only to protect her family within the bounds of the law. Carl asks if there is any real difference between her two requests, while she insists they are completely different concepts. A soft clasp sounds as Eisel brings her gloved hands together to explain her request with more precision. Eisel declares she will save the world. In a room adorned with fine art, Carl questions her knowledge while a vision of the monster-infested borders highlights the Empire's dire lack of winter supplies. A quick tap-tap sounds from her fingers. Eisel predicts the Imperial Palace's fall within 15 days as a sharp swish sounds from her movement. Carl experiences a sudden visible flinch. Eisel offers to resolve the troop issues. A soft swish sounds as Eisel spreads her hand, promising a year's worth of food and supplies for 500,000 troops. Carl stares in stunned, golden-eyed silence. A sudden bolt of shock strikes Carl as he realizes she claims to solve a months-long crisis instantly. He internally reels at her massive offer.
Eisel responds with a bright, cheerful grin.
Carl asks if she truly intends to provide everything free of charge.
Eisel confirms that it is indeed free.
As a soft rustle sounds, Eisel rises and explains her terms are a fair price to secure the cooperation of such an unapproachable man.
A smooth slide sounds as she pushes a black card across the table.
Eisel insists he is the only one who can help, leaving Carl in a pensive state.
A heavy step sounds across the floor.
Carl points out that she is leveraging a high-level secret to impose these bizarre conditions. Carl focuses his intense gaze on her.
Carl demands to know her true identity. Eisel pauses to consider his direct question.
Eisel rests her chin on her hand.
Eisel explains her humble origins and her past indifference toward wealth while Carl struggles to follow her logic.
A knowing grin touches her lips. Eisel laughs and beams with joy, declaring money is the ultimate tool for controlling information, archmages, and armies.
Carl stands stoically as she finishes. Eisel mentions she is short on time despite her vast wealth and asks if he is satisfied with the proposed deal. Carl maintains a long, silent stare. Eisel addresses Archduke Karl Georg Byron directly and asks him to make his final choice.
A light rustle sounds from her documents. A rhythmic tap-tap sounds as Eisel thanks him for his quick decision before returning to the topic of his memory.
Chibi-style Eisel looks on with confusion.
Carl reiterates her previous statement about him not knowing who she is.
Carl asks if they have met before. Eisel maintains a calm and steady gaze. Carl reflects on the impossibility of remembering everyone while feeling an inexplicable sense of discomfort. An uneasy feeling washes over the man. Carl asks when their meeting occurred.
Eisel suggests they first met over a decade ago, possibly 15 years in the past.
Carl calculates that they were talking then.
Eisel notes she understands his forgetfulness, mentioning they haven't met since a specific incident and that she has stayed out of the public eye.
Eisel offers him a serene, knowing smile.
As she rises, Eisel bluntly reminds him that he was once a coward and a crybaby.
Carl experiences another sharp, annoyed flinch. A swish sounds as a memory of a childhood promise is framed by blooming pink roses.
A flashback reveals a dark-haired woman reflecting on the bitterness of her past choices.
Money rains down as she admits she realized early on that wealth is the only path to happiness. The dark-haired woman stands in the shadow of the parents who took her in.
She recalls the neglect she felt after her adoptive parents had twins shortly after her arrival.
The woman runs through the dark, clutching her meager savings and reflecting on the tragic reality of surviving without money. White-haired baby Eisel expresses her delight at being reincarnated, feeling her life has never been better. With a soft roll sounding, baby Eisel reflects on the familiar names of the empire and realizes her family is incredibly wealthy. She exhales with a light woo after successfully rolling over, caring little for the genre of her new world. A heavy thump sounds as Eisel's father, a man with light brown hair and glasses, delivers the devastating news of their bankruptcy.
Young Eisel stares in stunned silence.
The property of House Spencer is mortgaged overnight, leaving Eisel to question if nobles can truly go bankrupt. A sudden flop sounds as the father collapses in despair, while Eisel wonders how 3 generations of wealth vanished in 3 days. Left with only a rundown mansion, Eisel wonders why the home wasn't seized along with everything else. The family discovers they cannot sell the mansion because it officially belongs to the imperial family. A heavy droop sounds as Eisel's mother apologizes for the meager meal, but the father insists it is better than any feast. The father warmly thanks his wife for the fruit. The girl eats her meal. Eisel observes the soup, noting it has grown thinner from being boiled repeatedly.
A thoughtful hum sounds as she acknowledges their extreme poverty.
The mother asks if her husband is referring to an old friend.
The father smiles, explaining that his friend promised to find a way to help them.
A light clap sounds from the mother's hands.
A wave of chills washes over the room as the mother's expression turns terrifyingly intense. The father experiences a sudden nervous flinch as his wife warns him against starting any more strange businesses.
A thoughtful hum sounds as the parents continue their tense conversation.
Eisel continues to chew her food silently. Documents reveal that the bankruptcy was caused by the previous Viscount overextending the business before Eisel's father took over.
Desperate to save the family, the father invested everything into a new venture.
He was ultimately betrayed by a friend, losing everything and leaving only a written apology. The young girl looks sad. A quick whip sounds as Eisel sharply tells her father to read the room after he tries to call the situation a relief.
A sharp gasp sounds as the father realizes his mistake under his wife's dark and looming aura.
The mother tells her husband she loves his trusting nature, but warns him not to take losses in their current state.
The parents worry that while they can endure thin gruel, Eisel shouldn't have to starve at her age. A light, clean sound echoes as Eisel licks her plate completely spotless. The parents stare at their daughter, unsure whether to be happy or sad about her appetite. A worried thought sounds as they struggle with the fact that she is eating such bland food. Eisel licks her lips and tells her parents the soup was actually quite edible. A light ahem sounds as the father promises that the imperial family's decision on their bankruptcy subsidy is coming soon.
A heavy doom sounds as the mother warns her husband that many carefree nobles have starved to death.
Eisel decides she was fine. Her head gives a soft tilt as she tries to remember which novel she has been reincarnated into. A quick scribble-scritch sounds as the 4-year-old Eisel writes down what she knows about her new world. A weary groan sounds as she realizes she has read far too many books to identify this specific story. A weary sigh sounds as she slumps over her desk, wondering if there is anything she can do.
She resolves to figure out the plot as quickly as possible.
Her father returns home empty-handed and exhausted after another long day of searching for work.
Eisel stands with a firm gaze, declaring that money is everything and she refuses to live poorly.
She ponders the potential genre of her life, hoping it's a romance rather than a horror story.
A loud bang sounds as someone begins hammering on the front door.
A heavy slam wham sounds as the violent knocking continues. Eisel peeks from the stairs, wondering who could be visiting so early in the morning. A soft peak sounds as she decides to act like no one is home since her parents are away. A loud bam whack sounds as the persistent visitors continue to batter the door. A soft creak sounds as Eisel realizes she has no choice but to open the door. A sudden swing sounds as young Eisel opens the door and is greeted by a flurry of blooming roses. A man with dark blue hair and sharp red eyes stands at the door, wearing an ornate purple-lined cloak and a jeweled brooch. A soft whisper sounds as an attendant informs the man that this is indeed the child he is looking for, while Eisel puts on an act of wide-eyed innocence. With a visible frown, the dark-haired man demands to know if she is Eisel Latanya. The little girl looks up at him with a bewildered expression. Eisel wonders if she should slam the door or if he might be a guest of her parents.
A low rummage sounds as the man searches his cloak with an expression of deep irritation.
A quick whip sounds as he presents a document and skeptically asks if a fallen noble child like her can even read. The young girl stares at the purple document in confusion. The man and his knights glare down at her as several question marks float around her head. A harsh sounds as the man expresses his disbelief at having to teach such an illiterate girl. A soft tisk sounds as he looks down at her with disdain. Eisel internally seethes after being called a dumb girl, finding his random rudeness incredibly irritating.
Eisel asks if he is from House Basquiella, catching him off guard as he wonders how she knew that.
A light tap sounds as she points to the document in her hand. A sudden wave of rage washes over the man as she bluntly asks if he is stupid, leaving him speechless.
Amidst a sense of doom, the man stands frozen, while Eisel cheerfully notes that the notice seems intended for her.
An attendant nervously tries to interject as the man's frustration peaks. Eisel puts on a sparkly, innocent act, wondering if he would really get angry at a child like her. A sharp scoff sounds as the man looks away and offers her some advice. Thorny vines frame his warning that while the offer is open to all House Basquiella descendants, she should avoid it to escape the reminder of her poverty. Eisel narrows her eyes, unable to determine if he is trying to insult or curse her.
A quick turn sounds as the man walks away, leaving the young girl standing alone in the doorway.
Eisel realizes she can't even offer him salt because they're too poor to afford any. A light toss sounds as she throws sand at his departing back, wishing for him to step in something unpleasant on his way out. Later, the scene shifts to the fireplace as someone mentions House Basquiella and the time of year.
Bjork and his wife discuss the situation with a worried expression.
Bjork asks Eisel if she has read the notice, and she gives a quick nod in response. The document is revealed to be a qualification notice for the girl. Eisel thinks to herself that it is a surprise to learn the Aspensers were related to the Basquiellas. Narration explains that House Basquiella was once a powerful duchy that ruled over the empire. Eisel reflects on the fact that this history is entirely new information to her. The father explains that while the girl isn't required to go, Basquiella's education is exceptionally well known.
Bjork looks at his daughter with a gentle but concerned smile.
Eisel stares back at her father in silence. A heavy slump sounds as Eisel leans back into the sofa, looking exhausted by the news. The girl looks up at the ceiling in deep thought. A soft clench sounds as Bjork worries that Eisel might struggle to keep up with the difficult classes without a tutor. A rhythmic step sounds as Eisel's small feet move across the floor. The mother tells Eisel she can go if she is interested, and the girl smiles back. The mother reflects on the fact that Eisel lacks a basic noble education and likely won't get another chance like this. Dark, wilting flowers illustrate the mother's fear of having to tell her child she might be shunned for her lowly origins.
Eisel looks on with a determined gaze. Eisel firmly declares that she wants to go, prompting her father to ask if she is certain as the fire crackles in the hearth.
The girl gives a bright, blooming beam of joy. Eisel decides she cannot pass up this fantastic opportunity to find out more about her new world. The scene shifts to a magnificent, gold-adorned palace shimmering under the sky. Eisel arrives at the grand estate, noting that it looks incredibly expensive.
A guard stands at the entrance, startled by the arrival of the visitors.
A heavy step sounds as the guard approaches Barrick and Eisel, asking what brings them to the palace. The freckled guard looks at the purple document in confusion, wondering what it is.
The notice is confirmed to be a legitimate branch family document from House Basquiela.
A quick glance sounds as the guard looks back and forth between the paper and the visitors. The guard expresses disbelief that such plain-looking people could be descendants of House Basquiela.
Standing beside her father, Eisel's simple clothing is noted as being rather plain.
Barrick formally introduces them as being from House Spencer, despite the guard's obvious skepticism.
A thoughtful hum sounds as the guard admits he has never heard of their house before.
Eisel is surprised that he would actually say such a thing out loud to Batter. The young girl calls out to the guard, catching him off guard. Eisel asks if he is a noble, finding his blatant rudeness toward them quite shocking. A smirk plays on Eisel's lips as she notes that only nobles usually speak so informally to her father.
The little girl gives a bright, sweet smile that catches the guard by surprise. A sudden nervous flinch sounds as the guard is startled by her direct and innocent questioning.
Eisel stands there with a glowing, innocent aura that leaves the guard speechless. A quick swish sounds as the guard nervously clears them to enter and directs them to the right. Barrick worries that if even a guard looks down on them, the treatment from other nobles will be far worse. The young girl remains quiet, taking in the grand atmosphere of the estate. A weary sigh sounds as the father silently hopes that Eisel won't be hurt by others. A soft squeeze sounds as Eisel holds her father's arm, knowing she must continue the journey alone.
The girl smiles brightly and tells her father that she will be heading in now. Barrick is deeply touched by his daughter's courage and gently cups her face.
A light ruffle sounds as the father pets her head and tells her to take care.
A rhythmic step sounds as a tall, dark-haired man approaches the pair.
The man scowls as he looks down at the visitors with deep disdain. A sharp sneer sounds as he questions their identity with an arrogant expression.
He introduces himself as Gerald Basquiela and offers a hand, mentioning his son is also a student.
Eisel feels a wave of anger at his sarcastic tone after he was so rude before. A light reach sounds as Barrick extends his hand to complete the formal greeting. A quick flip sounds as the exchange is punctuated by a tense and uncomfortable energy. Barrick looks on with a steady but serious gaze behind his glasses. A quick turn sounds as Gerald walks away with a self-satisfied smirk.
A soft rub sounds as Gerald immediately wipes his hand with a cloth after the handshake.
A soft clench sounds as Eisel watches him, committing the name Gerald Basquiela to memory. The young girl wonders who he thinks he is to act so high money. Eisel reflects on the fact that she has her own reasons for attending the school. A soft creak sounds as a large door is pushed open, revealing a new room.
Eisel enters the room and looks around with a surprised expression.
A young blonde girl in a blue dress gives a sudden spring as she is startled by Eisel's arrival. Eisel looks on curiously as the other girl nervously stammers out a greeting. A light crack sounds as the blonde girl, Lancia, excitedly says it is nice to meet her. Eisel stares at her with wide eyes, surprised by the girl's sudden burst of energy. A sharp slap sounds as Lancia covers her mouth in horror after realizing she used an accent. A shaky gasp sounds as Lancia tears up, apologizing for her mistaken speech. A light poof sounds as Lancia's face turns bright red with embarrassment, while Eisel finds her adorable. Lancia cries out in despair that she is ruining her first impression. The scene shifts to the grand and ornate architecture of the palace's interior. A soft wipe sounds as Lancia continues to dab at her eyes with a handkerchief. Lancia explains that her family is from Arafox, which Eisel realizes explains her unique accent.
Lancia explains she spent a year trying to sound dignified, but her old habits return when she is nervous.
Lancia worries that capital nobles will call her a country bumpkin, and Eisel notes that she isn't entirely wrong.
Eisel reassures Lancia that accents are not the only things people might dislike.
The young girl notes that poverty and low social status are often judged far more harshly.
Lancia looks up at Eisel with teary, curious eyes.
A soft blink sounds as Lancia tells Eisel she looks like a pretty doll. A soft blink sounds as Lancia marvels at Eisel's vibrant red eyes.
The blonde girl thinks they are beautiful. A soft giggle sounds as Lancia's mood shifts to bright laughter.
A heavy step sounds as Eisel attempts to finish her formal introduction.
A black-haired boy with red eyes appears, looking quite displeased.
A heavy step sounds as Lancia cowers in fear of the approaching stranger.
A sudden spring sounds as the boy interrupts Lancia's introduction to demand if she is Eisel.
A soft sniffle sounds as the boy confirms his suspicions with a cold look.
A light shrug sounds as the boy repeats his father's warning to avoid low-class girls. The boy claims Eisel's plain clothing proves she is a noble in name only. He compares her family to common street peasants. Eisel remains silent with a stoic and unimpressed expression.
A low snicker sounds as Eisel evaluates the boy's arrogance with a skeptical hum.
Eisel bluntly notes that the boy appears much older than her.
The black-haired boy proudly declares that he is already 10 years old.
A soft tilt sounds as Eisel questions why a 10-year-old is still in the beginner class. A loud dun sounds as the boy realizes he has just been called an idiot. Eisel instructs Lancia to stand so they can compare their heights.
A nervous tremble sounds as the boy remains frozen in shock.
A sudden flinch sounds as Eisel points out that the boy is even shorter than Lancia.
A sharp ah sounds as the boy rages at the insult while Eisel asks why he is so angry. A wave of rage washes over the boy's face as he grinds his teeth.
A soft humph sounds as Eisel wonders how anyone could be so rude to a stranger.
A loud yell sounds as the boy furiously demands an apology for her remarks.
A soft murmur sounds as the other children begin to whisper about the growing commotion. A loud thud sounds as the boy expresses total disbelief that she doesn't know who he is. Eisel admits she only knows his father's name. A soft shake sounds as Lancia confirms she has never heard of the boy either. A soft tilt sounds as the boy's ego is further crushed.
Eisel wonders if all high-ranking noble children are as troubled as this boy.
A bright sparkle sounds as Eisel briefly imagines a more theatrical confrontation. The boy demands an apology for the height comments, making Eisel curious about the consequences of refusal. Narrative text explains that Eisel recognizes this behavior as a typical tantrum from a spoiled child. A soft hum sounds as the girl ponders her next move. A sharp gah sounds as the boy demands she bow her head and apologize properly. A heavy step sounds as Eisel moves closer to the shouting boy. The boy smirks, then Eisel tells him to lower that. A sharp glare sounds as Eisel's eyes lock onto her target. A loud smack sounds as Eisel headbutts the boy while shouting her insincere apology. A soft humph sounds as the girl looks away with a satisfied pout. A painful sounds as the boy recoils with a sudden nosebleed. Lancia cries out in panic upon seeing the block. Eisel rubs her forehead, feeling the slight sting of the impact. A soft mutter sounds as the grand hall fills with many voices. A soft murmur sounds as the surrounding children continue to whisper about the incident. Eisel rubs her forehead after the impact. A narration box explains that Raven fled the classroom in a panic after his nosebleed. A soft murmur and whisper sound as the remaining students exchange glances and talk amongst themselves. A soft sniffle sounds as Lancia worries about the mark on Eisel's forehead while the girl sighs over the loss of her peace and quiet. A soft rub sounds as Eisel winces at her forehead just as a sharp creak signals someone new entering. A purple-haired man wearing glasses and a gold-patterned robe stands at the front holding several books. A heavy frown sounds as the man surveys the classroom with a serious expression behind his glasses. A rhythmic step sounds as the man walks down the center of the lecture hall toward the students. He formally introduces himself as the instructor for the beginner class. A light clack sounds as the instructor adjusts his gold-rimmed glasses while addressing the room. The instructor stops and fixes his gaze on the section where Eisel and Lancia are sitting. A sudden jolt sounds as Lancia realizes the instructor is staring directly at them, while narrative text identifies her as Lancia Ermund. Narrative text notes that it is common for high-ranking nobles to bring their personal servants to these classes. A soft slip sounds as the instructor closes his eyes and notes that this violation occurs every year despite his warnings. The instructor sharply addresses Lancia, causing her to cry out in surprise. He bluntly tells her that while she may be uncomfortable, she must send her servant out of the room immediately. A light swish sounds as Lancia stammers in confusion while Eisel is stunned that she was just mistaken for an attendant. Eisel remains silent, her mouth slightly agape at the instructor's rude assumption. The purple-haired instructor waits with a cool and expectant gaze for the servant to leave. A light raise sounds as Eisel lifts her purple document to prove her identity as a student. The instructor looks down at the official paper with a look of surprise. A soft nod sounds as Eisel confirms the legitimacy of her status. A soft, flustered sound as the instructor realizes his mistake and questions how a girl like her is related to House Basquiela. A light play sounds as the man sets the document back down on the desk. A rhythmic step sounds as the instructor walks away from their desk without a word of apology. A soft ahem sounds as the man clears his throat to regain his composure and continue the lesson. A soft hum sounds as Eisel watches him, her expression turning skeptical and pensive. He explains that the class will focus on teaching the fundamental skills and knowledge required of the nobility.
A light tap sounds as the instructor shows them the textbook, History of Ragostek, and orders them to read it for next week's test.
A loud bustle sounds as the students immediately begin to complain and shout about the unexpected exam.
Eisel watches the commotion with a silent and focused gaze.
The young girl notes the thickness of the book and desperately hopes that it will be provided to them for free. A loud dun sounds as the instructor shatters her hopes by telling everyone they must purchase the book from a store. Eisel is struck with worry, wondering if her family can even afford such an expensive textbook. A light tap sounds as the man concludes the class and tells the students he will see them next week. The instructor suddenly calls out to Eisel, catching her off guard as she wonders what he wants now. A light scamper sounds as Lancia follows Eisel down to the front of the room to answer the instructor. A soft pass sounds as the man holds out a thick, leather-bound book with gold detailing toward Eisel. Eisel takes the heavy book with a confused expression, asking why he is giving it to her. A light tumble sounds as he dumps even more items into her arms, leaving her completely baffled. The instructor turns his head away, refusing to give any further explanation for his actions. A light step sounds as the man walks away, leaving Eisel to wonder if he is just using her as an errand girl because of her status. Lancia watches the interaction with wide, concerned eyes. A loud rush sounds as the scene shifts to the grand, ornate architectural details of the academy hallway. A light dash sounds as the instructor peeks back over his shoulder while walking quickly away. A heavy step sounds as Eisel pants under the weight of the massive books she is forced to carry. A sharp glare sounds as Eisel grumbles about the instructor's rudeness and the extreme weight of the books. The purple-haired man looks on with a sidelong glance, his expression unreadable. A heavy stare sounds as the instructor continues walking without looking back at the struggling girl. A light grab sounds as Eisel shifts her grip on the heavy textbooks, determined to make it out of the hall. The purple-haired instructor asks Eisel if she wants the textbook and tells her she can keep it.
Eisel questions why he is giving it to her just because he has an extra copy.
The man remains silent, his expression unreadable as he looks away.
A soft slip sounds as he adjusts his glasses and claims he was going to throw the worn-out book away.
Eisel notes to herself that despite being well-read, the book is in excellent condition. She asked him directly if he made her carry the books just so he could gift her this one.
A soft swish sounds as the instructor turns his head further away in silence.
The leather-bound textbook is titled History of Ragostek.
Eisel smiles brightly and thanks him, promising to take very good care of the gift.
A soft whip sounds as the man dismisses the girl while she happily agrees to leave. The young girl cheers with excitement as she holds her new book. She notices the full name of the owner, Ezekiel Barregos Velen, written inside the cover. A look of sudden realization and shock flashes in her vibrant red eyes.
She recalls a dark poem about a monocled archmage named Velen bringing on a storm.
A soft lift sounds as Eisel looks up in total disbelief.
She identifies her instructor as the legendary and terrifying archmage Velen. A formal banner names him as the archmage with a monocle.
Narrative text describes him as a sea-born mage who traveled with violent cyclones.
It explains that he was a great menace to sailors who sang songs to ward off his storms.
The lyrics of the old song about drinking through Velen's storms appear on a scroll. Eisel ponders how the young man before her will eventually become that powerful wizard. She calculates that the current time is about a decade before the original novel's plot begins. The girl tries to remember the specific plot details involving Archmage Velen.
A sharp gasp sounds as another startling realization strikes her.
Lancia looks surprised as she sits inside the carriage. A soft swish sounds as Eisel waves goodbye and tells Lancia that she is fine after their long day.
Eisel asks Lancia if she is doing all right.
Lancia looks down and says she is okay, noting that Eisel must be the one offended by today's events.
A soft fidget sounds as Lancia notes that her friend is still a high-ranking noble.
The blonde girl blushes and tells Eisel that she looks far more noble than herself.
A happy giggle sounds as Eisel is amused by the compliment.
A sharp creak sounds from the carriage wheel as it begins to move.
Eisel thanks Lancia for the ride home and reminds her not to worry about her accent.
Lancia listens with a sad and thoughtful expression.
Eisel tells her that speaking differently shouldn't matter to anyone.
She gently suggests that Lancia can work on changing her speech if it worries her that much. A soft sniffle sounds as Lancia looks at her friend with teary, touched eyes. A cheerful "I" sounds as Lancia responds in her local accent before correcting herself. Eisel thinks that while it may take time, Lancia will eventually become a proper noble lady. A grand chandelier illuminates a lavishly decorated dining hall.
Clack and clink sounds echo as a formal dinner is served.
A sudden pause sounds as someone stops Karimemi.
The gray-haired Duke mentions that he heard some very interesting news today.
A soft wipe sounds as Gerald finishes eating and asks what the news is.
A hand reaches out to pick up a glass of red wine. A soft lift sounds as the Duke reveals he knows about Raven's nosebleed and his flight from class.
A sudden flinch sounds as Raven and his mother react in terror to the Duke's cold tone.
The Duke expresses his disappointment and announces he is intervening in his grandson's education.
A soft swirl sounds as the wine moves within the glass. A soft tremble sounds as Raven cowers in the darkness of his grandfather's immense presence.
The Duke stares coldly at the cowering Raven, stating that since he has a mouth, he should be able to explain his actions himself.
A sharp clack sounds as the Duke questions if Gerald had any other reason for ignoring his direct orders beyond a simple nosebleed. The Duke asks bluntly if it is true that the incident occurred after he was struck by a young girl. A soft tisk sounds as the gray-haired Duke calls out Gerald Winster by name with an icy and disappointed tone. A loud grit sounds as the black-haired Gerald Winster sweats under the immense pressure of the Duke's piercing gaze. A sharp glance sounds as Gerald shifts his eyes away, his expression strained by frustration and anxiety. A soft munch sounds as a clatter echoes while Gerald tries to continue eating through the stifling silence.
A dark smirk sounds as Gerald forms a malicious expression while looking down at his plate.
A sudden jolt sounds as Raven's eye wide with shock, terrified by the weight of his grandfather's mood.
A heavy squeeze sounds as a hand clenches tightly against the table in a display of repressed anger.
A sharp sound sounds as the Duke rises, finding it hard to believe a Branch family would dare contradict them after she attended class as if nothing had happened. A sudden turn sounds as the Duke orders the child to be brought there immediately, leaving Gerald stunned.
A loud clack sounds against the ornate walls, punctuating the gravity of the Duke's sudden and firm command.
A soft rub sounds as Gerald mumbles a curse while wiping his mouth with a napkin.
A light rattle sounds as Raven trembles, his spirit completely crushed by the oppressive atmosphere in the room.
A cold directive to work hard appears as the scene transitions away from the dinner table.
A sharp scoff sounds as Gerald looks back over his shoulder with a resentful and bitter glare.
A loud shut sounds as the dining hall doors close, leaving the room in a heavy silence. Shadows deepen around the dejected boy.
A soft quiver sounds as he trembles. A heavy thump sounds as Raven is called a pathetic thing, his despair clearly visible in his dark surroundings. A soft, teary sound as Raven's eyes well up with tears while he struggles to speak.
Under a crescent moon, a faint voice offers a tearful apology to his father from within the dark academy building.
A soft sounds as the white-haired Eisel ponders her situation while standing in her pajamas.
A loud bustle sounds as Eisel walks through the capital, reflecting on her limited knowledge of romance novels.
A light scamper sounds as the young girl runs through the crowded streets, lost in deep thought. Eisel tries to remember the specific world-ending details of the original story she once read. Visions of despair, destruction, and a world full of conflict and bloodshed flash through her mind. A soft whew sounds as Eisel exhales, feeling the weight of the world's inevitable doom.
A light chirp sounds as she notes the world is inevitably destined for total destruction.
A heavy stare sounds as Eisel recalls the gist of the plot where a powerful evil destroys everything. The young girl looks on with a solemn expression, realizing that this nightmare is now her reality. She reflects on how the spread of evil will eventually bring the world to the brink of ruin. A dark thought crosses her mind. A firm clench sounds as Eisel laments that she was born into poverty only to die young in a doomed world. A soft sounds as the girl wonders if the world will actually be destroyed as foretold.
A light step sounds as Eisel observes the peaceful nature of the capital, which contrasts with her dark premonitions.
A loud rush sounds as she runs past townspeople, finding it hard to imagine monsters running amok in the city. A soft step sounds on the path. A soft sounds from the odor. A happy smile sounds as Eisel greets the bookstore owner warmly despite his surprised expression. The man gruffly asks why she is there and reminds her that his shop is a bookstore, not a library.
A light grin sounds as Eisel remains cheerful in the face of the man's familiar grumbling.
A soft sounds as the bookstore owner studies the persistent young girl with a skeptical look. A happy hee-hee sounds as Eisel giggles when the man tells her she must finish her reading within the day. The man asks if she is looking for playmates after she claims she isn't there for books this time.
Eisel admits that while playing would be nice, she actually has an important favor to ask of him.
The bookstore owner is surprised when she points toward the newspaper he is holding in his hand. A soft ponder sounds as the man explains that his shop is the only one capable of publishing evening papers in the capital. Looking toward the town, Eisel asks if any of the local newspapers have recently begun publishing a morning edition.
The gray-haired bookstore owner lets out a confused "huh?" as he stares in shock.
Looking down at the white-haired girl, the man is met with an intense stare as she questions why he is asking her so many questions.
Eisel clarifies her curiosity and asks if he knows if one of the newly established morning papers is named Knox. The young girl looks up with an expectant and hopeful expression. The man confirms that Knox is the firm publishing morning papers but wonders how a child like her would even know about them.
He jokingly asks if her father works there or if she's looking for a job, prompting a bright smile from the little girl.
A loud rush sounds as Eisel runs through the streets, reflecting on the newspaper that first reported the world's end in the original story.
She recalls how Nox continued to leak information to the public, despite the nobility's desperate attempts to suppress the truth and flee.
The distribution of these papers eventually sparked massive chaos and led to a full-scale revolt within the capital.
A soft huff sounds as Eisel walks along, her breath visible in the air while she processes these dark memories.
Her head droops as she confirms that the unfolding events match the tragic story she once read.
A bead of sweat rolls down her face while she realizes the gravity of being trapped in a doomed world. While she knows the major turning points of the coming apocalypse, she laments her inability to predict immediate daily events.
Looking toward the horizon, Eisel feels a sense of hopelessness, believing the world is inevitably destined for ruin.
The red-eyed girl maintains a somber and deep expression as she ponders the weight of her knowledge.
She struggles with the realization that despite knowing the plot, she cannot recall the names of the story's main characters.
Looking back on her past life, she finds that the details of the nuances have become blurred and confusing over the years.
A long stare sounds as Eisel stands in quiet contemplation, looking down at her small hands.
A heavy frown crosses her face as she tries to reconcile her past knowledge with her current reality.
She decides to clear her mind and stop dwelling on these distressing thoughts for the time being.
A firm clench sounds as she balls her hand into a fist, determined to find a way forward.
She resolves to stop overthinking and instead start using what she knows to her own advantage.
Bathed in a soft light, Eisel looks upward with a newfound sense of purpose.
Later that evening, the girl sits in the living room with her parents, Bjork and her mother, in a stifling silence.
A soft ponder sounds as Eisel wonders how she could possibly explain her situation to her family.
She imagines trying to advise them on business ventures based on the future, but doubts they would believe an 8-year-old child.
A tired sigh sounds as she admits to herself that she would likely dismiss such claims if roles were reversed.
A sudden jump sounds as Eisel is startled when her mother asks if she is feeling all right.
Bjork looks at his daughter through his glasses, worried that something unfortunate might have happened to her. The mother persists in asking if anything is wrong, but Eisel quickly tries to dismiss their concerns as nothing.
A loud bang sounds as someone begins hammering on the front door, interrupting the family's quiet evening.
A series of loud bangs and whams echo through the house, causing the mother to worry about who would visit so late.
A rhythmic step sounds as Bjork takes a lantern and walks toward the entrance to investigate the aggressive knocking.
Another step sounds as the blonde man grumbles about the rude visitor ignoring the doorbell before asking who is there.
A soft pull sounds as the door opens, revealing a group of cloaked men who ask for Bjork Spencer by name.
A sharp gaze sounds as Bjork notices a sword hidden beneath a cloak, leading him to suspect the visitor is a knight. He wonders in silent confusion why high-ranking knights would appear at his home in the middle of the night.
The lead figure informs Bjork that there is a specific person he is required to meet the following day. A soft pass sounds as a formal purple envelope is handed over to the stunned father.
Bjork's eyes widen as he recognizes the crest on the seal as belonging to the Basquiela family. The knight emphasizes that the person he is to meet values punctuality, leaving Bjork to wonder why they want to see him or Eisel.
The visitor promises that an escort will be provided upon his arrival before attempting to take his leave.
Bjork's expression turns to one of cold anger as he prepares to confront the rude messenger.
He demands to know who sent them and why they believe they can simply show up unannounced and issue orders.
Raising his voice, Bjork questions if this aggressive behavior is truly the proper conduct for a knight of Basquiela.
The knight remains silent, his face partially obscured by the shadows of his dark hood.
Bjork's red eyes glint with a dangerous intensity as he refuses to be intimidated by the strangers.
A soft swish sounds as the man finally pulls back his hood to reveal his face to the family.
He formally introduces himself as Baron Bramvir, a member of Duke Basquiela's personal guard.
The green-haired man reveals a scarred face and a stern, respectful demeanor as he fulfills his duty.
A bead of sweat rolls down Bjork's face as he realizes the high status of the man at his door.
Looking at the envelope, Bjork wonders why the Duke would suddenly request to see his young daughter.
A sharp glance sounds as the green-haired knight shifts his gaze with a cold and piercing look.
The knight's eyes travel over the humble surroundings, noting the shabby appearance of the small home. A ragged feeling fills the air as the visitor silently judges the family's obvious lack of wealth.
A soft pull sounds as the cloaked man adjusts his hood and dismisses the conversation to take his leave.
Under the light of the crescent moon, the knight bids the family a pleasant night before departing.
A light step sounds as Eisel's mother approaches her husband, asking who the late visitor was and why there was shouting.
A curious gaze sounds as Eisel watches her parents from the side, sensing the heavy and confusing atmosphere. The white-haired girl looks up in surprise, questioning the mysterious item her father is now holding.
A soft pass sounds as Bierik hands the formal purple envelope over to his daughter.
A soft ack sounds as Eisel recognizes the powerful crest of the Basquiela family on the letter's seal.
A soft mumble sounds as the girl claims she doesn't know why they've been summoned while her mother urges her to tell the truth.
Eisel worries that Raven tattled to his grandfather about her making his nose bleed during their previous encounter.
A heavy doom sounds as she imagines the Duke's wrath, fearing he will personally intervene and make her pay for hurting his grandson.
The girl quickly shakes her head, doubting that such a powerful man would care about a simple fight between children.
Bierik looks down through his glasses, his expression solemn as he studies his daughter's nervous reaction. A soft sounds as Eisel sighs, her eyes filled with dread over the impending and unwanted meeting. A soft ha sound as the girl looks out at the night, realizing she will likely never be friends with the Duke's son now. A loud shout echoes through the grand mansion as someone demands that those in the way move immediately.
A sharp yell sounds as Raven argues with the staff, claiming his head aches and he needs a break from his room.
The servants politely refuse to let him leave, offering to bring him medication for his illness instead. The two men look on with worried and tired expressions, struggling to manage the young lord's defiant temper.
Raven shouts back, questioning if they will take responsibility if he faints, and insisting he will finish his studies later.
The boy's face is flushed with anger as he arrogantly questions who the servants think they are to issue him orders.
Maids whisper and murmur in the background while Raven rages about losing his mind if he stays confined another second. A heavy step sounds on the floor as an imposing figure approaches the source of the commotion.
A dark loom sounds as the tall and stern Duke Basquiela appears, his presence instantly silencing the room. A heavy thump sounds as Raven's heart sinks when his father calls his name in a cold tone. A soft ha sounds as the Duke scolds his son for never listening and breaking the specific rules he was given. A soft whisper sounds among the maids as the Duke reminds Raven that he was forbidden from leaving his room while the sun was up.
A firm grip sounds as the terrified boy clutches his pants, his hands trembling violently under his father's gaze. A soft tsk sounds as the Duke looks down with a cold expression, stating that his expectations for the boy were clearly too high.
Raven desperately promises to try harder next time, but his father dismisses the plea as an empty and humiliating excuse.
A dizzy swirl sounds as Raven begins to feel faint, stuttering out a desperate plea for mercy.
A heavy thud sounds as the boy drops to his knees, begging his father for forgiveness and promising to do better.
A soft gasp sounds as a maid covers her mouth in horror, watching the young lord break down in front of his father.
Raven tearfully pledges to return to his room and study immediately if his father will only forgive him.
A tired sigh sounds as the Duke looks down at his sobbing son, calling the display a pathetic sight.
A formal bow sounds as a servant acknowledges the Duke, who prepares to walk away from his dejected son.
The Duke stops to ask if the daughter of the house they never heard of before was named Eisel Latanya Spencer.
A sharp flinch sounds as Raven reacts with shock and confusion at the sudden mention of the girl's name. The boy wonders in silent disbelief why his father would even know or care about that specific girl. A heavy throw sounds as a book is tossed toward the startled boy, punctuating the Duke's stern command. The Duke reminds his son of an upcoming test, his back turned as he continues to issue orders. A heavy step sounds as the man leaves, warning Raven not to disappoint him any further than he already has. A firm squeeze sounds as Raven clutches the book tightly, his head bowed in a mixture of fear and resentment.
The boy offers a quiet and submissive response to his father's retreating back. The scene transitions through the opulent and cold hallways of the Basquiela estate.
A polite bow sounds as a maid asks a visitor to wait in the grand parlor for a moment. A tired sigh sounds as Bierik reflects on the heavy burden of their current situation. He worries that the powerful Duke will punish Eisel for the harm she caused his grandson.
The blonde man recalls the cruel and hurtful insults the boy directed at his daughter. He envisions the arrogant and spiteful face of the child who instigated the conflict.
Bjork admits to himself that he feels no remorse for the young lord's injuries. A firm clench sounds as he fears the Duke may use his influence to expel Eisel. He contemplates preventing her from attending the academy, but knows she is determined to go.
The father resolves to beg for forgiveness, even if he must kneel before the Duke. A nervous gulp sounds as Bierik's eyes reveals the deep anxiety he feels for his daughter. He realizes that the summons was likely meant to force him to plead for Eisel's pardon.
Eisel offers a pastry to her father, complimenting its taste as his face twitches in surprise.
The white-haired girl enjoys her treat with a bright and innocent smile. Bjork looks at his daughter with a gaze filled with warmth and quiet affection. He encourages her to eat as much as she likes since there is a large spread.
Plates full of jam-filled pastries, cookies, and sweet treats sit on the table. A soft munch sounds as Eisel eats while her father lets out a nervous sigh.
A crisp crunch sounds as the young girl focuses intently on her delicious strawberry pastry.
Internally, Eisel considers the gravity of the things she must say to the Duke.
She reflects on how unfortunate it is for a powerful man to meddle in children's affairs.
A respectful bow sounds as a maid enters the room to address the waiting family.
Burek asks for directions, and the maid offers to guide them to the Duke's private study.
A soft clasp sounds as the blonde man takes his daughter's small hand in his.
The maid leads the pair through the grand and opulent hallways of the Basquiela estate.
They approach the ornate entrance of the study, guided by the silent servant.
Eisel looks up in surprise as she prepares to face the formidable man behind the doors.
A loud creak sounds as the massive doors are opened to reveal the Duke's inner sanctum.
Duke Vahidman Basquiela sits regally at his desk, his presence filling the large room.
A sharp stare sounds as the gray-haired Duke commands the visitors to approach him.
A heavy gulp sounds as Burek feels the weight of the Duke's intense and cold gaze.
The father recognizes the man before him as the powerful and legendary Duke Vahidman Basquiela.
A sudden freeze sounds as the family stops far from the Duke's desk in apprehension.
The Duke beckons them closer with a promise of safety, causing Burek to flinch and stammer.
Moving with cautious and careful steps, the pair approaches the Duke like wary animals.
Eisel looks on with curiosity, meeting the Duke's gaze with her wide red eyes.
She notices several large, crowded bags of supplies piled up in the background behind the desk.
The young girl stares intently at the stern man sitting before her.
A piercing stare sounds as the Duke studies the white-haired child with an unreadable look.
Eisel wonders to herself if the man is glaring at her out of anger for his grandson.
She notes that the Duke truly does appear to be in a very angry mood.
The Duke mentions that Ceballos cried upon seeing him, while Eisel continues to watch him.
Confused by the sudden statement, the girl asks for clarification about what he means.
She is completely baffled, questioning the meaning of the Duke's cryptic and sudden remark.
The Duke asks the young girl if she feels any fear in his presence. Eisel admits her fear while internally reflecting on the Duke's terrifying power to destroy her.
A soft "ha" sounds as the Duke is amused by the girl's blunt and honest response.
He reflects on the fact that the girl does not actually seem frightened by him at all.
The man thinks about how everyone else usually cowers in absolute terror at his sight.
A series of quivers and trembles sounds as Burek sweats profusely under the Duke's gaze. The Duke notes her lack of tears, leading Eisel to ask if crying would let her go home. The powerful man continues to study the fearless girl with a look of quiet and growing intrigue. A rhythmic top sounds as the Duke muses that despite any mischief, his grandson is still family, admitting he summoned the girl only out of curiosity.
Eisel remains silent and composed as the formidable man observes her.
He reflects on the weak connection of House Spencer, noting it descended from an illegitimate child who fled the main Basquiela family long ago.
The man considers that their blood tie is so thin that they are barely even relatives.
The white-haired girl speaks up to confirm if they are indeed just distant relatives.
The Duke remains quiet, his expression unreadable as he studies the child.
A sudden flinch sounds as Burek stammers out an exclamation of respect to the Duke.
The blonde man desperately offers to take any punishment the Duke has planned for his daughter, but the Duke questions why he would want to be punished if he isn't at fault.
The gray-haired Duke stares intently, questioning the blonde man on the irresponsibility of a father blindly defending his child. Bjork looks away in shame, quietly trying to explain himself.
Looking back at Eisel, the Duke asks what punishment she thinks is fair, while the girl internally criticizes him for being mean and petty over a child's scrap.
She thinks to herself that for a Duke of the Empire, he seems incredibly narrow-minded and immature.
The Duke asks her directly if she believes she deserves punishment or if there's a reason she should be spared. The white-haired girl decides not to explain her reasoning, suspecting the powerful man wouldn't care for her perspective anyway.
A soft humph sounds as the girl turns her head defiantly, leaving her father to panic in the background.
The man thinks to himself that he is seeing something entirely new in his old age. The Duke hums in thought, fascinated by the girl's lack of intimidation. He's impressed that a child can look him directly in the eye without a hint of fear. A sharp axe sounds as Burek cries out when the Duke declares that if the girl won't speak, she must be punished. The Duke surprises everyone by admitting that after hearing the full story, his grandson was also at fault for saying something foolish. Eisel looks up in surprise when the man announces she will receive the exact same punishment as Raven.
The Duke explains that writing out 2 pages will be enough of a penance for her to have the matter overlooked.
A sudden flinch sounds as the blonde man reacts to the Duke's dark joke about whether he expected a more heinous punishment, like amputation. The Duke focuses on the girl again, asking if she was truly scared of him. Eisel admits to being a little frightened, prompting the Duke to laugh and remark that it takes a strong heart to stand up to a Basquiela. He reveals his true motive was simply to see the bravery of the child who hit his grandson on the first day of school.
The gray-haired man looks on with a calm, almost serene expression.
Close-up of Eisel's red eyes as she stares back at the man. The girl feels a sudden sense of recognition, realizing why the Duke seemed so familiar to her.
She concludes that she definitely knows who he is from her knowledge of the book's events.
She recalls that in the original story, this man dies in a tragic accident before the main plot even begins.
The Duke leans back in his chair, seemingly relaxed after the confrontation.
Eisel glances toward the large bag she noticed earlier.
She begins to piece together the identity of the mysterious supplies stored in the corner. A quick dash sounds as Eisel suddenly runs toward the sacks, leaving her father shocked. A quiet peek sounds as Eisel opens a bag to look inside, ignoring her father's panicked questioning.
Bjork shouts in alarm at her behavior while she stares at a collection of glass bottles, calmly asking the Duke a question.
The Duke watches her with intense curiosity, his hand resting on his chin.
A soft sniff sounds as Eisel brings one of the bottles close to her nose. The girl asks if the contents are gunpowder, and the Duke confirms it while wondering how a child could recognize such a thing.
A sudden pause sounds as the Duke listens to the girl explain that she read about it in a book and could smell it from across the room.
A quick rise sounds as the Duke stands, noting that the lids are screwed on tight and the scent shouldn't have leaked.
A sharp clack sounds as the Duke places a bottle back, questioning the girl's claim since the powder has an overwhelmingly sugary odor. A deep sniff sounds as the man leans in close to the bottle once more. He questions why the girl would think it smells sweet when it should be acrid.
Burek reaches out a nervous hand as his daughter continues her investigation.
Eisel makes a thoughtful face as she continues to ponder the strange scent.
A notification reveals the man's full name as Vahidman Pendleton Basquiela, the one destined to die early.
The Duke looks down at the bottles, his profile bathed in shadow.
A grim thought confirms that his impending death was caused by being caught in a massive explosion. Text explains that cheap sugar was substituted for sulfur in gunpowder production to reduce military costs. A silhouette of the grand estate is consumed by a massive explosion that ultimately claimed the Duke's life in the original story. The fallout of his death led to internal power struggles and left the Empire vulnerable to the coming war.
Duke Vahidman wonders if the young girl's earlier warnings were intended to be a subtle hint. Eisel watches him, hoping he has the sense to handle the dangerous situation on his own. She reflects that while the choice is his, the information she provided could be the deciding factor between life and death.
The scene shifts to the bright and ornate interior of the academy as classes begin.
The blonde-haired raven approaches Eisel, asking with wide eyes if something major happened.
A soft pft sounds as Eisel finds the girl's cute accent and worried expression quite endearing.
Raven turns bright red, her face flushing with embarrassment at Eisel's reaction.
She continues to press for details, asking what the Duke said during their encounter.
A soft swish sounds as Eisel looks away in confusion, unsure why the news of her meeting spread so quickly.
Raven stammers out that she heard about the meeting with the Duke, prompting Eisel to ask how she found out.
The grand staircase of the academy stands silent as the students gather for their lessons.
A green-haired girl explains that she told her father about the conflict, and he spoke to the Duke on their behalf.
Eisel finally understands why she was given such a light punishment of a 2-page apology letter.
Raven looks down sadly, still feeling guilty over the entire ordeal. A soft hick sounds as Raven begins to tear up under Eisel's steady and silent stare.
A sudden pff sounds as Eisel can't help but laugh at the girl's overly dramatic reaction.
A soft pew sounds as Raven sighs in relief, while Eisel internally notes what a worrier she is. Eisel prepares for the day's exam, marveling at how long it has been since she last took a test. She recalls her previous life, where she studied tirelessly to maintain a college scholarship. The teacher notes that the test was difficult and full of unfamiliar terminology.
Eisel realizes the exam covers history filled with archaic and strange words.
A sharp clack sounds as the purple-haired teacher lowers his glasses and announces the start of the exam.
A soft swish sounds as the test paper is handed out to the waiting students. A dramatic dun sounds as the complex questions on the paper are revealed. Eisel looks at the questions and concludes that the material is incredibly simple for her. A soft whew sounds as Eisel scribbles down her answers with lightning speed. She finishes early and looks up to find the teacher staring at her with an unreadable expression. A rhythmic step sounds as the teacher approaches her desk, making her wonder if he was watching her the whole time. A close-up reveals the sharp, analytical gaze of the teacher as he looks down at her. He studies her completed exam paper, which is filled with precise and thorough answers.
The teacher permits her to leave since she is finished, telling her someone is waiting outside.
A quiet murmur sounds as the other students react with shock that she finished so quickly.
Whispers and murmurs fill the hallway as Eisel exits the classroom ahead of everyone else.
Eisel stands in the hallway feeling a bit nervous about who might be waiting for her.
A maid bows respectfully and asks Eisel to follow her to a different location. A soft sounds as Eisel looks suspicious, wondering where she is being taken so suddenly.
She questions the sudden change in plans as they head toward the academy house.
A steady step sounds as Eisel follows the maid out into the bright daylight.
Eisel stops in her tracks, her eyes widening in surprise at the sight before her.
Duke Vahidman stands in an open field, looking regal in his dark and purple robes. The Duke commands his men to blow it up, much to the young girl's horror.
Eisel cowers in fear, bracing herself for the impact of a looming disaster.
A loud fsh sounds as a massive pillar of black smoke erupts into the sky.
The young girl falls to her knees, her hands trembling as she reacts to the shockwave. She sweats and gasps in terror, questioning what just happened in front of her. She notices a transparent magical wall protected her, but she is still baffled by the sudden explosion. The Duke chuckles and asks if she was surprised, while an angry Eisel fumes that her heart nearly stopped.
Duke Vahidman observes that even strong-hearted individuals can be startled, while Eisel finds his method of testing her bravery incredibly eccentric.
The young girl stares back with an irritated expression, wondering if the man is actually serious.
A soft chuckle sounds as the gray-haired man looks down at her with amusement.
Eisel internally questions the Duke's sanity for subjecting a child to such a dangerous display. A soft whish sounds as the Duke asks if she has ever seen an explosion, to which she simply replies that she has not. He continues his inquiry, asking for her opinion on the power of the blast she just witnessed. Eisel gives a silent nod, wondering what point the powerful man is trying to make with this conversation. Vahidman explains that her earlier comment about sweet-smelling gunpowder led to an investigation revealing the use of low-quality sugar as a substitute.
He holds up a glass vial, noting that the suppliers tried to trick him into buying inferior materials to save on costs.
The man reveals that this particular batch of gunpowder has already been linked to several dangerous oxidants and injuries.
Close-up of Eisel's red eye as she processes the severity of the situation she just influenced.
She recalls that the Duke's original fate in the book was caused by a very similar and tragic accident.
Eisel offers a blunt "I don't know" as the Duke stands over her, holding the evidence of the sabotage. The Duke demands to know how a mere child could possibly know that gunpowder shouldn't possess a sweet aroma.
He muses that most children who have never seen gunpowder would likely believe a sweet scent is perfectly normal. The gray-haired man rests his hand on his chin, his gaze remaining fixed and analytical.
He stares down at the girl with a calm but piercing look, waiting for a plausible explanation.
Eisel panics internally, realizing that she needs a convincing story because the Duke won't be fooled by a simple lie. She worries that the man would never believe the truth about her past life and knowledge of the future. A soft sounds as Vahidman questions the girl's hesitation and silence. Eisel quickly explains that she read about the chemical components of gunpowder and concluded that a sweet smell was logically inconsistent. She reinforces her story by stating that she simply found the contradiction to be quite odd.
A quiet gulp sounds as the girl nervously hopes that the Duke accepts her fabricated reasoning.
A soft heh sounds as the man begins to react to her unexpected answer. A loud ha-ha sounds as the Duke laughs, impressed that an 8-year-old child noticed an error that veteran experts missed for years. A soft sweat sounds as Eisel remains tense, unsure if the powerful man has truly been convinced by her excuse. The bright landscape stands quiet as the Duke notes that her explanation was sufficient for him. A soft rustle sounds as the Duke ruffles Eisel's hair, admitting he hates vague answers but respects those who try their best. The ornate Academy bridge stands tall as the Duke begins to conclude their unexpected meeting.
A sharp freeze sounds as the Duke announces he will hire Eisel's father to be his new personal secretary.
A system notification highlights her shock at her father being appointed to such a high-ranking position in House Basquiela. The girl is overwhelmed by the idea of her father becoming the Duke's own personal assistant.
A quiet rummage sounds as Vahidman reaches into his robes, remarking that Eisel's character reflects well on her parents.
A soft swish sounds as the man pulls out a formal black envelope while the girl watches in confusion. He presents the invitation, stating that his birthday celebration is next week and he wants her parents to attend. The Duke makes it clear that he is inviting her personally and expects her to make an appearance. Vahidman looks on with a calm expression, seemingly satisfied with the outcome of their day. Eisel stares at the invitation in her hand, her mind racing with the implications of this new connection. A soft whish sounds as the scene transitions, with Eisel reflecting that things turned out better than expected. A crumpled ball of paper sits on the floor as a cold voice declares the situation to be pathetic.
A dark-haired man with glowing red eyes expresses his deep disappointment over a failed examination. He stares down with a look of pure disdain, questioning the competence of the person before him. The blue-haired boy trembles and stammers, desperately trying to explain that the situation isn't what it seems. The man berates the child for receiving a top-tier education and still failing to outperform a girl from a disgraced family. He reaches for an ornate object, asking the terrified boy if he has any more excuses left to offer. The man reveals he knew the child had been wasting years on a secret project and expresses his disgust.
A sharp gasp sounds as the man's hands grasp a beautiful crystalline blue sword.
The young boy pleads for mercy, begging the man not to damage the sword and promising to do better in the future. The dark-haired man insists on teaching the boy the consequences of failure, ignoring his pleas for any other punishment. A sudden loud crack sounds as the man snaps the precious blue sword in half. The grand ballroom shines with golden light. Lancia marvels at the sheer brilliance of the room. Lancia's excitement at her first banquet puzzles the nearby nobles. Lancia explains why she was previously forced into silence. Eisel expresses her deep relief at their shared attendance. Lancia compares Eisel to a beautiful forest fairy.
Eisel is stunned by the sudden compliment.
Eisel questions her friend's magical comparison.
The girls exchange charming, humble compliments about their looks. Lancia dismisses her own striking appearance as being tacky. Eisel studies her friend's self-deprecating expression.
Eisel reassures Lancia that her blonde hair is dazzling.
A sudden embrace sounds as Lancia pulls Eisel close. A soft squeeze sounds as a male voice interrupts.
A rhythmic step sounds as Eisel introduces herself formally.
To call Ermund, Count Ermund explains his busy schedule today. Lancia enthusiastically confirms her safety and comfort with Eisel. They discuss the unfortunate absence of Eisel's parents to Mai. Lily's sudden fever kept her parents home in Saluzin. Count Ermund offers to serve as Eisel's personal guardian. A soft kiss sounds as the Count says goodbye.
Eisel remains alone in the Golden Hall.
A light brush sounds as Eisel clicks her tongue. Lancia shares exciting news of the prince's unexpected arrival. Eisel doubts a minor noble will ever meet royalty. Lancia playfully suggests the prince might be fat and ugly.
Lancia's optimism about handsome princes amuses the pragmatic Eisel.
A soft laugh sounds as Eisel remains completely amazed.
A quiet mumble sounds as Eisel dismisses fairy tales.
Lancia reminds Eisel that they are both the same age.
A sudden laugh sounds as the scene shifts abruptly. Low murmurs sound through the crowd.
Guests notice something unusual happening across the crowded ballroom.
A quiet whisper sounds about a solitary, brooding boy.
A sharp scowl sounds as Raven's background is revealed. The crowd gossips about Raven's academic failure and disappointment.
A sudden clench sounds from Raven.
Raven endures a life of strict, forced academic isolation. Raven directs his bitter resentment entirely toward the young girl.
A harsh grit sounds as Raven seethes with hatred.
The boy questions why he is compared to Eisel. Raven swears a vengeful oath against her for a seat.
A sharp tisk sounds and sounds. A soft sigh sounds as Eisel observes Raven's behavior.
Eisel critiques Raven's lack of social effort at the party.
A quiet sip sounds as Eisel judges his personality.
Eisel's analytical gaze remains fixed. Raven's temper flares during a confrontation. A sudden drag sounds as Raven pulls a companion away. Eisel pities the victim of Raven's aggressive outburst.
Eisel observes the unfolding drama with a concerned and watchful eye.
A hand reaches out to suddenly grab a sharp, thin tool.
A thought bubble questions what he intends to do with that dangerous knife.
Eisel's concern grows as she recognizes the danger despite the attacker's young age.
The young girl opens the door.
She spots them on the balcony as Raven holds the knife over the trembling boy. A violent lunge sounds as Raven attacks the cowering, silver-haired child.
Her decorated shoe steps forward.
A sharp slash sounds as Eisel shocks Raven by blocking his impulsive assault.
A rhythmic step sounds as the blonde prince Isamel turns his head.
The Duke bows respectfully, apologizing for his long absence, while the prince politely accepts his words.
Murmurs and whispers sound through the crowd, questioning why the Duke respects the low-ranking fifth prince.
The prince remains in a precarious position.
Duke Fahidman observes that Prince Ismail has matured into a dependable young man over the past year.
The blonde prince humbly suggests that such heavy courtesy is unnecessary.
The prince begins to introduce his thoughts before being interrupted.
The Duke asserts that his respect is only natural for a loyal imperial vassal.
The gray-haired man mentions the influence of Prince Gladiol and his royal consort.
Prince Ismail realizes the Duke has been monitoring his brother's political movements.
A sudden exclamation point marks the prince's realization of the Duke's hidden motives.
The Duke mentions Raven's academic failure, noting a twitch of irritation from the prince.
Vahidman explains he won't enroll Raven in the academy, much to the prince's feigned disappointment.
The prince stares with his purple eyes, claiming he hoped Raven would try again.
A soft laugh sounds as the Duke reacts to the prince's hollow sentiment.
The blonde boy apologizes, realizing he should have been more cautious with his speech. He asks the Duke to forgive his youthful mistake, which the older man readily accepts.
A sudden lean sounds as a servant interrupts to address Prince Ismail.
Rage bubbles within the Duke as the servant reports a major problem.
A quick turn sounds as the prince asks for clarification on the issue.
The prince finds himself alone on the grand staircase, searching for the source of the trouble. A sharp whip sounds as the panicked servant wonders where the prince has vanished to.
Murmurs and whispers sound as the guests witness the Duke's visible frustration. A harsh grind sounds as the Duke seethes over being ignored by the prince. The powerful man bristles at the audacity of the fifth prince's sudden departure.
A rapid dash sounds through the hallway.
A heavy step sounds as a golden-tipped boot rushes toward the balcony.
Prince Ismail grits his teeth, wishing he had come alone to avoid this scene.
A sudden reach sounds as he prays that nothing terrible has happened yet.
The prince stops in utter shock.
A dramatic scene unfolds outside.
A child trembles in fear.
A loud weep sounds as the victim breaks down in tears from the trauma. The prince shouts for everyone to get out of the way as he takes charge.
Eisel remains composed, asking the boys to simply stop their senseless conflict immediately.
Raven rages against her interference while Eisel warns him of the mounting danger.
A sharp seethe sounds as Raven blames Eisel for his confinement and his broken sword.
Eisel sighs in frustration, reminding Raven that she didn't force him to do anything.
Raven screams that everything is her fault and lies about the other boy starting the fight.
A loud shout sounds as they argue over who actually bumped into whom.
Eisel frowns deeply, wondering how to handle the child who has clearly lost his mind.
Raven demands that Eisel hand over the boy, promising that he will not punish her if she complies immediately.
Raven threatens to cut Carl's face just as he previously slashed the boy's arm.
Eisel realizes that Raven has completely lost his mind and the situation is becoming truly dangerous. Raven angrily questions Eisel's identity and demands to know why she keeps interfering with him while Carl cowers in fear.
A quick glance sounds as Eisel remains uncertain about her relationship with the boy.
A sob sounds as Carl trembles, leaving Eisel to wonder if she should have stayed inside to avoid this mess.
A grab sounds as Raven seizes the boy who pleaded for help and cried out in pain.
Eisel winces as her arm begins to throb and ache with a sharp pain.
Raven orders her to move, but Eisel shocks him by claiming that they actually know each other.
Eisel sighs, realizing she has no other choice but to make a desperate claim to save the boy.
Eisel boldly declares that Carl is her boyfriend.
Carl immediately stops crying in confusion as Raven stares at the pair in utter shock.
Eisel doubles down on her claim, insisting that the boy belongs to her.
Prince Ismail and his attendant are left stunned by Eisel's sudden and public declaration.
An ahem sounds as Eisel awkwardly clears her throat to maintain the lie.
Raven screams for her to shut up, refusing to let her order him around any longer.
A sigh sounds as Eisel watches the terrified boy continue to tremble and quiver. Eisel stares blankly, wondering what her next move should be to resolve the conflict.
A small puddle forms beneath Carl's white boots as he stands paralyzed by fear.
A sniffle and hic sounds as the two children stand together in the awkward silence.
Eisel bluntly asks Carl if he wet his pants, causing him to burst into loud wails. Raven flies into a rage, threatening to kill the boy if he does not stop crying immediately. The overwhelming noise of screaming and yelling makes Eisel regret getting involved in the situation. Eisel hopes the nearby adults will finally step in and resolve the escalating drama. Eisel firmly tells the boys that they have done quite enough. A snap sounds as Raven's patience finally breaks completely.
A clang sounds as Raven drops the knife while screaming at everyone to be quiet.
A dash and shove sound as Raven rushes forward, yelling that no one should tell him what to do.
Eisel gasps in shock as she is suddenly and violently pushed.
A bump sounds as Eisel collides with Carl, causing them both to stagger backward.
A stumble sounds as they both lose their footing at the balcony's edge.
Carl falls through the air.
Carl plunges deep into the water.
Bubbles rise as he sinks down. Two children sink into the depths. A panicked voice cries out Carl's name.
Carl coughs and sputters violently after being pulled from the water.
Eisel reflects on the absolute mess of the party, lamenting her injuries and the fall into the water.
A rise sounds as Eisel struggles to stand, wishing she had never intervened in the fight.
A dizzy sensation washes over Eisel as her vision begins to blur significantly.
A fall sounds as Eisel collapses, but the attendant catches her and asks if she's all right.
Eisel's thoughts drift as a heavy wave of dizziness overcomes her.
She wonders if her blood loss contributed to her losing consciousness after falling into the water.
Through her blurry vision, Eisel hears someone panic that she is dead while she weakly tries to deny it.
A steady hand holds the girl.
A hysterical scream declares the girl's death.
Lush green plants frame the palace.
A step sounds through the hallway.
Rhythmic steps echo outside grand doors.
A burst sounds as a man enters a room to address the crisis. A sharp tisk sounds in the heavy sirens.
A rhythmic step sounds as the blonde man approaches with a cold gaze. A sudden push sounds as a servant is shoved aside by the blonde man.
Bjork enters a lavish bedroom where Eisel is resting while Gerald stands nearby.
Eisel lies unconscious and pale with her sleeve stained by a dark patch of blood. Bjork is horrified that the girl's wounds were left completely untreated.
A sudden squeeze sounds as Bjork clenches his fist in regret over sending the child alone.
Gerald suggests that she isn't seriously injured, so he doesn't have to worry, but Bjork asks how he can possibly say that after seeing the state she is in. Bjork asks Gerald if he would be happy if his own child had returned to him in this condition and been told not to worry. A rhythmic step sounds as Bjork explains that while her wounds might seem insignificant to others, she is his daughter, and it is incomparably grave to him that the child he raised with care has injuries all over her body. A memory of Eisel's bright and happy smile flashes through his mind.
Bjork is outraged that Gerald told him not to fret after his only child was wounded by a knife and fell into a pond at the party, demanding to know where the person responsible is.
He asks for the location of the young lord who hurt Eisel's arm. Gerald sighs heavily and argues that even if it was his son's fault, there is an undeniable chasm of difference in rank between Bjork and himself.
A narrative bubble describes the status gap between a duke's grandson and the child of a distant, unknown relative.
Gerald claims the child is just a useless girl, and since he already talked with Beric, the incident should be overlooked, but Beric insists on hearing it from the boy directly.
Gerald stares intensely and declares that the conversation is over.
Gerald asks if Bjork would have stopped in his position, while a voice argues that the circumstances are entirely different.
He questions if Bjork is trying to claim that the two of them are similar in status.
A sudden grab sounds as Bjork seizes Gerald by the collar and asks what the difference is, while the older man asks what he thinks he is doing. A dark panel asks what exactly the difference is between them.
The two men exchange a tense and silent glare.
A sudden squeeze sounds as Gerald wonders why the blonde man is so incredibly strong.
Bjork tells Gerald that his twisted mindset is why he didn't even bother tending to Eisel's wounds after she fainted.
Gerald grunts and demands to be let go, but Bjork condemns him for trying to cover up the crime rather than making his son apologize for what he did, questioning if this is how a parent should behave.
Gerald calls for the guards to remove Bjork while the soldiers plead for the men to calm down before matters become worse.
A sudden shove sounds as Bjork demands that Raven be brought to the room this instant. Gerald is indignant that Bjork still demands an apology after attacking him, but Bjork retorts that compared to what Gerald's son did, his actions are far more gentlemanly. Gerald sighs and says he hoped to resolve the matter with words, but realizes that is now impossible.
A loud creak sounds as Gerald calls for his guards to enter the room, reminding them they are in the Basquiela estate.
A rhythmic step sounds as Gerald states that regardless of who is at fault, grabbing a duke's direct heir by the collar will lead to a severe punishment. Gerald orders the arrest of Bjork for the audacity of his actions, but a voice interrupts from behind, claiming it is reasonable for a father to act that way when someone else's child swung a knife at his daughter.
A sharp whip sounds as Gerald turns in shock toward the new car.
A rhythmic step sounds as the gray-haired Duke Vahidman enters the room.
Bjork looks at the elder man and asks what brings him to the scene.
A sudden reach sounds as the Duke reaches out to adjust Gerald's collar, while Gerald insists he cannot condone Bjork's actions.
A sudden pull and quick adjust sound as the Duke tells Gerald he will discuss the matter with him in private later.
Gerald argues that the Duke is too busy to involve himself in such a trivial matter, and claims he will handle it himself. A deep bow sounds as the Duke shows his respect to the situation.
The Duke states that a child's mistake stems from their parents' failure to properly educate them.
A rhythmic step sounds as Gerald asks what his father is saying, only for the Duke to tell him not to concern himself with a wench from a disgraced family, but another voice interrupts to say she is not just that. A sharp turn sounds as Prince Ismail declares that Eisel is not someone who should be disrespected by that word either. The young prince stares firmly while standing beside his attendant.
The Duke stands firm as the tension rises.
A rhythmic step sounds as a unit of knights enters the room. A collective gasp sounds as the guards recognize the presence of the Black Lions. A rhythmic step sounds as House Byron's elite knights stand behind the young boy, Carl. A nervous gulp sounds as Gerald realizes these knights are capable of holding their own against 5 people at once.
Gerald looks at Carl and questions why the knights of House Byron are standing behind the child.
A sudden flinch sounds as Gerald begins to wonder exactly who the boy Raven messed with actually is. Carl watches intently as a heavy atmosphere settles over the room.
Eisel lies unconscious on the bed with a dark bloodstain visible on her sleeve.
A raise sounds as Carl lifts his head to face the adults.
A chill sounds as Carl's yellow eye glows with a menacing light.
A jolt sounds as Gerald is startled by the young boy's sudden intensity. Carl warns Gerald that he will cut his tongue out if he dares to insult his savior again. The boy leans forward, insisting that he is being completely serious about his threat.
Bjork looks on with a neutral expression as he observes the boy's outburst.
Duke Vahidman maintains a stern and unreadable expression. A grit sounds as Gerald clenches his teeth in visible frustration.
A tense silence fills the room while the adults process the child's bold words.
A sigh sounds as Prince Ismail laments his decision to bring Carl along.
He wonders if Carl's fever from falling into the water is responsible for his sudden, bold behavior. A shy sensation overcomes Carl as he quickly looks away from the others. A groan sounds as Prince Ismail realizes that insulting the Duke's son and his presence is a dangerous move that will complicate matters.
A smile sounds as the Duke gives a cold, knowing smirk toward Gerald.
A ha-ha sounds as Gerald offers a forced, nervous laugh while trying to placate his father.
Duke Vahidman rebukes Gerald, stating that as a noble, he must be mindful of his manners regardless of his age.
Gerald is taken aback and asks for clarification. A dark and powerful energy emanates from Carl as he stands before the group.
Duke Vahidman asserts that his dignity represents the nobility of the entire country.
A jolt sounds as the Duke asks Prince Ismail for his agreement, startling the young boy.
Prince Ismail is covered in nervous sweat, shocked that the normally shy Carl is speaking so fluently.
Duke Vahidman tells the boy that he expects him to maintain that strong demeanor in the future.
A step and step sound as the group begins to move toward the unconscious girl.
A step sounds as Carl approaches the bed where Eisel is resting.
A glance sounds as the Duke acknowledges his attendant's respectful response.
A clock sounds as the terrified Raven is brought into the room. Raven begins to fidget and squirm while standing between the two carts.
A push sounds as Duke Vahidman shoves the boy forward, ordering him to approach. A sweat sounds as Raven stands trembling under Bjork's cold gaze.
Raven hysterically begs for forgiveness and attempts to offer an excuse for his actions.
A chill sounds as the Duke interrupts, telling Raven that he did not ask for any excuses. An sounds as Raven groans in terror while his eyes well with tears.
Duke Vahidman looks down with a piercing and unforgiving stare.
Bjork simply states that he understands the situation.
A turn sounds as the Duke shifts his cold gaze back toward his son. Duke Vahidman declares that he thought he raised a person, but his son has turned out to be nothing more than a beast. The Duke continues his harsh judgment, calling it unbelievable that his own son is worse than a ruthless street thug. Gerald attempts to defend himself, but Duke Vahidman sharply tells him to shut his mouth. The Duke announces that Gerald's authority and position will be temporarily stripped from him.
He orders Gerald to return to his room immediately to reflect on his actions.
A flinch sounds as Duke Vahidman screams for his son to leave right now. A grit sounds as Gerald clenches his jaw in fury before turning to leave.
A shut sounds as Gerald acknowledges the command while the door slams behind him. A turn sounds as the Duke looks back toward the children.
A respectful silence follows as the Duke stands before Barrack and the others.
Bjork stares forward with a calm but firm expression. Carl looks on with a blank and stoic face as the conflict resolves.
Carl turns away, seemingly lost in his own thoughts.
A gentle brush sounds as a hand moves through the girl's white hair.
Prince Ismail thinks Carl looked heroic earlier, but the gray-haired boy is flustered and confused about being called a prince.
Prince Ismail looks on with a curious and questioning expression.
Carl tilts his head in confusion, not understanding what the blonde boy means, while Prince Ismail is baffled that Carl doesn't understand despite having stopped crying.
A narrative bubble questions if the rigid education of House Byron forbids learning about romantic relationships. Prince Ismail bluntly informs Carl that he is essentially her lover.
A sudden flush overcomes Carl as he stares in wide-eyed shock at the revelation.
A deep blush stains Carl's face as he covers his mouth, stammering that he has never had a lover before. A heavy dun sounds as Prince Ismail is completely stunned by Carl's innocent reaction.
A soft swish sounds while Eisel sleeps peacefully, and Prince Ismail argues that she probably didn't mean it that way, but he is ignored. Carl smiles brightly and asks if this means they will eventually get married.
A series of vigorous shakes sound as Prince Ismail tries to snap Carl out of his old-fashioned thinking, explaining that being a couple doesn't always lead to marriage.
Carl's yellow eye glows with a sudden, intense focus.
A heavy flop sounds as Carl faceplants onto the bed in sheer embarrassment while Prince Ismail cries out in alarm.
Carl lies on the bed looking completely dizzy and stunned by the conversation.
A loud cry for Carl echoes through the grand and snowy courtyard of the estate.
Rhythmic steps sound as someone walks through the dark, quiet hallways of the palace.
A sudden halt sounds as Gerald stops in his tracks, nervously acknowledging his father's presence in the dimly lit corridor.
A sudden flinch sounds as Duke Fahidman tells Gerald that he has never regretted his birth more than he does right now, leaving the man speechless.
Duke Fahidman stares forward with a cold, piercing gaze filled with disappointment. A series of panted huffs sound as the Duke berates Gerald for being incompetent and getting in his way.
A heavy sigh sounds as the Duke looks at his son with utter disdain, stating he truly regrets having him as a son.
Gerald lets out a forced and nervous laugh, his face sweating from the intense pressure.
Panting and huffing, Gerald begins to offer a desperate apology to his father.
A sharp haw sounds as the Duke glares at Gerald with simmering fury.
A sudden turn sounds as the Duke moves away, deciding he no longer has time to deal with his son's failures.
A thought bubble reveals the Duke's intent to return immediately and resolve the underlying issue.
Rhythmic steps sound as Gerald walks away through the dark hallway, looking dejected.
A soft clasp sounds as hands reach out to touch one another on the bed.
A soft rustle sounds as Eisel wakes up and sits in bed, noticing Carl sleeping beside her.
Carl sleeps soundly on the bed, looking peaceful and tired.
A sudden pull sounds as Chibi Eisel wonders why Carl is holding her injured hand and tries to move away.
Eisel decides to leave the boy alone, thinking he is just a child in shock before realizing she is very thirsty.
Eisel stands by the window holding a cup of water, her white hair flowing.
A quick clack sounds as Prince Ismail enters the room with a cheerful smile.
A sudden frown appears as Eisel thinks the blonde boy has absolutely no manners for barging in.
A sharp whip sounds as Eisel turns away, deciding she is too exhausted to deal with the intruder.
A sudden turn sounds as Eisel looks back in shock at the persistent boy. Prince Ismail leans in and asks if she is indeed Eisel Latanya. The blonde boy introduces himself as Ismail, leaving Eisel looking utterly confused.
Eisel stares at the prince with a look of startled disbelief. A close-up shows a single piece of bread resting on a table. Both children look on with comical expressions of total confusion.
A quick peek and glance sound as Carl hides under the covers, nervously watching the others. A sudden swish and flutter sound as Prince Ismail pulls back the blanket, startling Carl into a cry of surprise.
A series of pushes and shoves sound as Prince Ismail forces a hesitant Carl toward Eisel, urging him to hurry.
Eisel looks at the boy with concern and asks if he is doing all right.
A sudden flinch sounds as Eisel reaches out to check the boy's forehead for a fever. Carl stammers that he just has a slight cold, prompting Eisel to tell him it makes sense after falling into the water and advising him to lie back down.
A quick tap sounds as Prince Ismail nudges a startled and blushing Carl.
Carl's face flushes a deep red as he shouts his name to the white-haired bro.
He stares forward with wide, shimmering golden eyes while his face continues to burn with embarrassment.
A close-up highlights the intricate green cravat tucked neatly under the boy's collar. A smile sounds as Carl beams with joy, leaving Eisel to wonder what could possibly make him so happy.
In a quiet corner of the room, Carl answers a question about his age, revealing he is only 8 years old.
His face remains flushed as he struggles to maintain his composure during the conversation.
Carl brings a hand to his face, stammering awkwardly as he tries to find his next words.
Eisel looks at him in complete shock, asking for clarification on his strange comment about the next 12 years.
A beam sounds as Carl looks up with an incredibly earnest and glowing expression.
A shy sensation overcomes Carl as he joyfully declares his intention for them to get married someday.
Eisel is left utterly speechless, her mind racing with confusion over the boy's sudden and bold proposal.
Prince Ismail covers his face in secondhand embarrassment at Carl's complete lack of social awareness.
A ha-ha sounds from within the grand estate, echoing through the air as the children's conversation continues.
Outside, the lush green leaves of the garden sway gently in the soft afternoon light.
A gloom settles over Carl as he realizes he may have completely misinterpreted the prince's previous words.
A groan sounds as Carl reacts in despair after Prince Ismail finishes explaining the truth of the situation to him.
Carl's golden eyes well with tears of pure mortification as he processes his earlier mistake.
Eisel looks on with a silent and questioning gaze, unsure of how to react to the boy's sudden shift in mood. A single tear glistens in the boy's eye as he looks down in overwhelming shame.
Prince Ismail notes the time and tells Carl they must leave, urging him to say his final goodbyes to the girl.
Looking small and dejected, Carl offers a sincere apology for his silly misunderstanding of her intentions. Eisel insists it was her own fault for being unclear, though she privately admits the apology makes her feel even more awkward.
Carl regains a bit of his confidence, telling the girl she is welcome to seek him out if she ever requires assistance.
Eisel starts to tell him he doesn't need to go to such lengths before she is interrupted by a sudden, startling thought.
The white-haired girl asks in disbelief if the boy is truly a member of the prestigious House Byron.
A nod sounds as the group confirms his lineage while standing in the ornate hallway.
Carl looks forward with a gentle and hopeful smile on his blushing face. A tap sounds as he adjusts his cravat, confirming that the name he gave is indeed his full and official name. Eisel watches him with a look of intense realization, her mind connecting the dots of his true identity.
She observes his distinct golden eyes and gray hair, noting how perfectly they match the historical description of his house.
A gulp sounds as Eisel swallows hard, struck by a monumental realization about the boy's future.
A vision of the future shows an older Carl as the legendary protagonist destined to survive the world's destruction and defeat the Dark Lord.
The dark premonition continues, identifying the gray-haired boy as the one who will eventually become the king of the next generation. In the vision, the grown warrior stands alone amidst the ruins of a destroyed town as a dry breeze brushes his hair. His golden eyes glow with a beast-like intensity as he grips the hilt of a sharp, heavy sword.
The legendary figure is seen ruthlessly slaying the monsters that lurk around every corner of the wasteland.
Back in the present, Carl stands innocently with a flower on his head, looking nothing like a battle-hardened hero. Eisel is baffled, wondering how such a feeble and timid child could possibly be the great protagonist from the stories. She notes to herself that both his family name and his appearance are perfectly consistent with the character description. A grin sounds as Carl offers her one last cheerful look before preparing to depart the room. The boy promises to see Eisel again soon, leaving the white-haired girl alone with her racing thoughts. Eisel watches him go, questioning if the fate of the entire world truly rests on those small and young shoulders. The scene shifts to the grand exterior of an academy building under a bright and clear sky. A tap and top sound as a teacher straightens a thick stack of papers on his desk. A purple-haired man wearing a monocle announces to the class that their test results will be revealed next week. A gloom falls over the classroom as the students groan and cry in collective dread over the upcoming results.
A rustle sounds as Eisel looks down at her own papers with a quiet and focused expression.
A droop sounds as a blonde-haired girl at a nearby desk collapses onto the table in complete academic despair. A lift sounds as the blonde girl raises her head, calling out Eisel's name with a tearful and desperate face. A hug sounds as the girl clings to Eisel while wailing about her failure, prompting a sudden and startled grunt of pain. Eisel's eyes widen as she reacts to a shocking development. A test paper confirms the unfortunate news that a student has failed. A soft sniffle sounds as a desperate classmate asks Eisel what they should do now. Eisel bluntly reminds her friend that she simply failed the test. A loud wah sounds as the blonde girl reacts to her academic failure with a sorrowful wail. Eisel watches her friend's dramatic outburst with a look of awkward disbelief. Eisel reflects on her past life as a diligent orphan for whom low grades were unthinkable. The white-haired girl looks away with a slight blush, lost in her own thoughts. Eisel tries to comfort her crying friend, Lancia, who reacts with confusion to the sudden kindness.
Eisel offers a warm and reassuring smile to the distressed blonde girl.
Lancia is deeply moved by the gesture, her face flushing as she looks on with shimmering eyes. Eisel clarifies that while being happy is good, achieving high scores is definitely better. A sudden cry sounds as Lancia despairs over her own perceived lack of intelligence. A quick tilt sounds as the purple-haired teacher interrupts, asking if it is already time to finish. Sniffling, Lancia acknowledges the lesson she has learned from her friend. Eisel remains silent, her mind racing as she observes Lancia's continuing emotional turmoil. A conversation echoes through the grand palace about finding something fun to do together. A soft rustle sounds as Lancia pulls Eisel along, eager to head out. A frantic dash sounds as someone fears they might trip during their hurried escape. The grand and ornate towers of the palace stand tall against a clear sky.
A series of steps sound in the hallway while a narrative reveals the Duke's recent decisions regarding House Byron.
Rhythmic steps sound as the two girls walk, discussing the mysterious absence of a classmate. Lancia wonders aloud if something has happened to the boy who stopped attending classes. Eisel listens with a somber expression, contemplating the secrecy surrounding recent events. A vision of heavy chains highlights the forced silence regarding the banquet incident. Eisel ponders why there has been no gossip about House Byron's involvement in the recent scandal. A glowing sigil represents the immense prestige and power of House Byron.
The narrative explains the dire consequences any noble house would face for offending the imperial relatives.
Standing in the dark, Eisel considers the implications of internal and external punishments for the family.
A soft sigh sounds as Eisel admits she feels unsettled by the lack of information.
A distinguished older man with gray hair and red eyes looks on with a calm gaze. Lancia stammers out a nervous introduction to the Duke, her face burning with embarrassment.
A thought bubble explains the merchant background and distant connection of House Ermund.
A sudden bow sounds as the Duke acknowledges the reliable business partnership between their families. A soft ruffle sounds as the Duke pats Lancia's head, asking about her father's health.
A quick tap sounds as Eisel organizes the homework assignments given to her by Duke Fahidman.
Eisel's eyes widen in surprise as she reacts to a sudden realization about her work.
A focused look highlights mentions of a large-scale annual festival on the desk. The morning light filters through the large windows of the beautifully decorated room.
A clink sounds as a plate of assorted cookies and tea is presented to the children.
A soft munch sounds as Lancia eats while the Duke remarks on Eisel's insightful questions. A rustle sounds as a paper filled with perfect marks is handed over for review. A gentle smile sounds as the Duke examines the impressive results on the paper.
A quick rustle sounds as the Duke prepares to conduct an evaluation instead of a standard lesson.
Eisel watches attentively, her red eyes focused on the upcoming task.
Steady steps sound as someone new approaches the room.
A young boy with light blue hair and deep blue eyes stands before them.
Both girls react with looks of wide-eyed wonder at the boy's striking appearance.
A close-up highlights the boy's calm and crystalline blue house. A sudden lift sounds as the boy raises his head, revealing his full face to the group. The young boy introduces himself as Elias Yilgert Besanichnal while the two girls look on, completely stunned.
Eisel's eyes widen as she realizes the name sounds incredibly familiar.
A droplet of sweat rolls down her face as she tries to place where she has heard that name before. A sudden realization hits her as she connects the name to the female lead of a novel. A vision shows the legendary female protagonist, a beautiful woman with long blue hair who was the center of a grand harem. The memory continues, describing her as a genius archer who possessed immense intelligence and powerful elemental skills. Eisel ponders if there was another important detail about the character that she is forgetting.
She recalls her personal dislike for the character, who is shown in the vision with a calm and distant smile.
The dark history of the character reveals that she died at a young age after being accused of conspiring with the enemy. The tragic truth was that she had been blackmailed because her younger brother was abducted, eventually choosing to sacrifice herself. The memory fades into a heavy purple gloom, signifying the character's lonely and tragic end.
A somber atmosphere lingers as the vision of the past concludes.
A soft sigh sounds as Eisel questions why any reader would enjoy a story with such a depressing ending for the protagonist.
She is confused as to why the girl is currently dressed as a boy, wondering if the brother is the one pretending to be her.
A long stare sounds as Eisel notes a 10-year age gap in the original story, while Elias looks back with a confused expression. Eisel offers an apology for staring, bluntly telling the boy that he is simply very pretty.
Lancia blushes as she looks at Elias, silently agreeing with Eisel's assessment of his appearance.
Elias responds bluntly, stating that he doesn't think calling a boy pretty is an appropriate compliment.
Eisel is left bewildered, wondering why such a remark would cause an issue. She suspects the girl might be acting sensitive on purpose to prevent anyone from guessing her true gender. The Duke interrupts the children, suggesting they all take a seat so they can finally talk.
Outside, the lush green trees sway gently under a clear and peaceful sky.
A quick flip sounds as a large red folder is opened on the table.
Elias looks over the documents, asking if it's true that she prevented a potential disaster involving gunpowder. Eisel tries to claim it was just a coincidence, but the Duke interjects that there is no such thing as luck, only skill. A sudden turn sounds as Eisel looks toward the Duke, silently seeking an explanation for the situation.
A gentle smile sounds as the gray-haired Duke looks back at her with a calm expression.
A wave of rage and confusion washes over Eisel as she wonders what kind of lesson she is being put through. A firm shut sounds as the red folder is closed on the table.
Elias looks at her thoughtfully, deciding that the information he has gathered should be enough.
Eisel is taken aback, asking exactly what he means by his cryptic comment.
A small and knowing smile appears on the blue-haired boy's face. A sudden raise sounds as he lifts the folder, looking at her with a bright and cheerful expression.
Eisel is left reeling, wondering if she was actually in the middle of a job interview without knowing it.
The Duke reveals that he recommended her to become an aide for Elias.
Eisel points out the absurdity of the request since she is only 8 years old, while Lancia continues to eat her snack.
She questions why an 8-year-old would even need an aide in the first place.
Elias explains that all of his sources praised her for having a truly remarkable memory.
He notes that her parents and her teacher were among those who gave their recommendation.
Eisel is shocked, wondering when her parents could have possibly made such an arrangement.
A quick rise sounds as Elias stands up, explaining that she won't be required to follow him around every single day. He tells her that her only duty will be to accompany him to a specific site once a week as part of her lesson. Eisel feels a bad feeling wash over her as she watches the boy's joyful and innocent smile.
She is skeptical, wondering how this task could possibly relate to the test they mentioned earlier. The Duke clarifies the nature of the exam, telling her she must figure out both the content and the answer on her own.
A chuckle sounds as the Duke finds Eisel's complaints about fairness to be quite entertaining.
Realizing she won't get any more information, Eisel lets out a long and defeated huff.
The Duke promises her a special reward if she manages to pass the difficult challenge.
A nervous ha-ha sounds as Eisel offers a small and awkward smile.
A chaotic clank and clunk sound as they arrive at a busy mining site filled with the bustle and chatter of workers.
The top of a white-haired head fills the frame. A soft step sounds as Elias tells Eisel they must go inside, prompting her skepticism.
Eisel questions the wisdom of bringing an 8-year-old girl into a mine.
Elias tells Eisel to wear her safety gear while she lets out alongside.
Narrative text explains that adult males took over mining operations after slavery was abolished.
Eisel thinks it is ridiculous to expect a young girl or boy to enter such a place. A soft rummage sounds as Elias asks if Eisel knows the true nature of his work.
A quick zip sounds as Elias pulls a pink folder from his satchel.
A sharp flip sounds as Elias reveals his job is to create detailed maps.
A quick tap sounds as Elias explains he explores and maps unrecorded regions.
A quick glance sounds as Eisel suddenly remembers a key detail.
Eisel recalls another exceptional skill Elias possessed in the original story.
A vision shows how the protagonist acted as a human compass and infused arrows with elemental power.
Elias looks at Eisel and asks if she is even paying attention.
Eisel wonders why she was brought along if Elias is capable of doing everything alone.
Elias hands over a stack of maps and books, telling Eisel to take them. Elias explains that his past maps vary in size and shape due to the mine's complexity.
A firm point sounds as Elias indicates specific markings on his previous maps.
A soft sigh sounds as Eisel questions why a child is performing such adult tasks.
A soft frown sounds as Elias listens to Eisel doubt her ability to perform the work.
Elias decides it is far too dangerous for Eisel to enter the actual mine. A relieved whew sounds as Eisel realizes she will be staying behind while Elias goes alone.
The scene shifts to a quiet workspace set up in a tent on a wooden platform.
Eisel hums to herself while contemplating the task at hand.
She ponders why the main character is hiding her gender and starting so young.
Turning away, Eisel decides she needs to focus entirely on the mapping task.
A soft scribble sounds as a lantern glows dimly in the workspace.
A repetitive scritch and scratch sound as Eisel meticulously redraws the complicated maps.
A soft sounds as Eisel focuses deeply on her work.
A sudden shake sounds as a wooden crate moves unexpectedly.
Surprised, Eisel looks up from her desk at the source of the noise.
A massive and loud crash echoes through the mining site.
A startled sound escapes Eisel as she looks around in confusion.
A sudden wobble sounds as Eisel struggles to keep her balance, asking what is happening.
A deep rumble and tremble sound as the earth begins to shake violently.
A chaotic rattle and quake sound as a supply wagon shakes under the force of the tremors.
A frantic dash sounds as Eisel flees the trembling tent, fearing the worst. Coughing from the dust, Eisel is confused to see miners walking calmly despite the rumbling boom. Eisel wonders why they are so calm when earthquakes are the deadliest threats to miners.
She panics at the thought of the ground collapsing with Elias still inside.
A sudden jolt sounds as Elias appears right behind Eisel. Overwhelmed by questions, the two children look at each other with confusion.
Elias asks what exactly Eisel is doing outside.
An awkward silence follows as Eisel stammers about the earthquake.
A soft pff sounds as Elias struggles to hold back a laugh. Eisel is annoyed, asking what he finds so funny. A soft shake sounds as Elias explains that this was not an earthquake at all.
Eisel stands dazed as she realizes the tremors were actually part of a training exercise.
A quick glance sounds as Elias explains the facility is far too deep and sturdy to collapse. A repetitive brush sounds as Elias dusts off Eisel's shoulder, noting that the miners are used to it. Elias looks directly at Eisel with an intense expression as he prepares to speak. Eisel stares back, her wide and startled eyes reflecting a sense of confusion. A soft pat sounds as Elias reaches out to gently touch the top of her yellow hard hat. A quick flip sounds as he retracts his hand, leaving a gasping Eisel in surprise. Clearing his throat with an ahem, Elias acknowledges the situation with a calm remark.
A sharp turn sounds as Elias heads back to work, demanding to see the progress she has made.
A solitary lantern glows steadily atop a wooden crate in the dim and quiet workspace. A quick flip sounds as Elias looks over the finished maps, impressed by the quality of her work. He tells Eisel that her work is sufficient for the day and she should head home.
Elias explains that he has more to finish and directs her to the carriage before saying goodbye.
Back at the estate, the gray-haired Duke lets out a thoughtful as he observes Eisel.
Eisel stands before him covered in dirt, having lost her balance during the commotion at the mine.
The Duke immediately orders the maid to prepare a warm bath for the disheveled girl. A soft wipe sounds as the Duke cleans a smudge from Eisel's face while asking about the test.
A rhythmic rub and pot sound as the Duke continues to dote on her, much to her confusion.
Eisel remains silent, the dirt on her cheek a testament to her rough day at the site.
The Duke questions why she has arrived at such a skeptical and dismissive conclusion.
Eisel bluntly states that she sees no point in being an aide or any connection between the two boys. A soft chuckle sounds as the Duke finds her directness and lack of pretension highly amusing.
He asks for her final answer regarding the true nature of the exam they previously discussed.
Eisel shifts the focus, stating that she was actually the one asking him about Elias. A sudden blink sounds as the Duke is momentarily taken aback by her bold redirection. With a gentle smile, he suggests that he should perhaps be the one answering the questions.
A soft plop sounds as the Duke settles into a seat, calling her approach to the exam preposterous.
A long gaze sounds as the Duke studies her intently with his deep and thoughtful red eyes. Eisel wonders why the Duke is so determined to keep the boy's true identity a secret from her. The Duke extends a hand, offering Eisel a small and unexpectedly heavy dark pouch.
Eisel is surprised to find that the small bag is filled with glittering and valuable gold coins.
She remains skeptical, assuming he has no intention of actually letting her keep such a fortune. Her eyes widen in pure shock when he tells her she can have it all if she doubles the amount. The Duke watches her reaction closely, a knowing and challenging look in his eye. He maintains his regal and calm composure as he waits for her response to his sudden offer.
A tight squeeze sounds as Eisel grips the pouch, her face a mask of annoyed and fiery determination.
She fumes internally, thinking about how irritating the old man is for playing such games. Outside, the grand and ornate palace stands tall under the warm and golden light of the sun. Narrative text within an ornate frame questions what must be done to prevent the world from ending. Gold coins rain down as Eisel concludes the best plan is to hoard money and hide away. Now dressed in a pink dress, Eisel lets out a soft while considering her next move. Narrative text notes the limited time available while showing a large and well-lit wooden building.
A loud creak and step sound as a black shoe treads upon the wooden floorboards inside.
A startled huh escapes a brown-haired waiter as he notices a young girl standing in the establishment. A soft lean sounds as the waiter bends down to ask the little girl what brings her to such a place.
The waiter looks at her with a friendly and inquisitive smile, his face covered in light freckles.
A bright smile sounds as Eisel puts on a sweet and innocent facade for the staff. A woman in an elegant blue dress appears, looking down at the child with a stern expression. The woman dismissively calls the girl a beggar and instructs the waiter to throw her out immediately. A quick glance sounds as Eisel looks toward them, her expression unbothered by the harsh words. The interior of the pub is filled with the energetic bustle and laughter of many patrons. Eisel thinks to herself that the place is quite similar to a pub she remembers from the story. Narrative text explains that a man named Ninetail used to overveer many secrets while working as a server. The red-haired man makes his way through the crowded pub.
Narrative text expresses absolute certainty that this is the correct location.
A squabble and bicker sound as the freckled waiter and stern woman argue while the red-haired man watches nearby.
A sudden "oh" sounds as someone suggests confirming a detail before questioning where another person is going.
A quick dash sounds as Eisel's small shoe steps away. The red-haired man looks over with a neutral and observant expression. Eisel looks up with wide and pleading red eyes. Bowing slightly, the red-haired man politely asks if the little lady requires any assistance.
A soft swish and beckon sound as Eisel gestures for him to lean in.
A soft lean sounds as the man moves closer, wondering if she wants to tell him something.
A small smirk sounds as Eisel realizes that this man is indeed the one she sought. A sudden flinch sounds as the man reacts with a look of intense shock.
Eisel whispers his secret name, asking if he is indeed Ninetail.
Narrative text describes him as a man willing to perform any task for the right price. A sudden rise sounds as the man stands tall, looming over a startled Eisel. A cold, icy sounds as the man's expression turns sharp and intimidating.
A sudden grab sounds as Eisel lets out a confused ha while being ringed.
A sudden dash sounds as the pub staff watches in utter bewilderment.
A distant voice shouts that the man's work shift is not yet finished.
The scene shifts to the upper exterior of the large wooden pub building. Eisel sits patiently on a bench in a dim and secluded room. A soft pull sounds as the red-haired man begins to loosen his bow tie. A heavy sigh sounds as the man looks down with a weary and annoyed expression. Narrative text notes that his menacing behavior toward a small child is entirely unnecessary.
A silent, harmless sounds as Eisel maintains her innocent and sweet facade.
The man demands to know who sent her, only for her to provide her full name.
A soft frown sounds as the man is skeptical when she claims to have sent herself.
Narrative text wonders if he simply misheard her unexpected and bold response.
A repetitive blink sounds as the man tells her not to joke, but she insists she is serious.
A bright beam sounds as Eisel smiles radiantly at the suspicious man.
A soft upset sounds as the man stares at her with deep frustration.
Narrative text wonders if the young girl is actually mocking him. Looming over her, the man warns that something terrible might happen if she doesn't tell the truth. A soft sounds as Eisel questions why her honesty is being met with such disbelief.
A soft ha sounds as the man considers how children usually react with fear to such threats.
Eisel explains she located him because she needs help, while he finds the claim completely preposterous.
Eisel retorts that it is more ridiculous for someone to have been trading secrets since age 7. The man is frozen in a moment of pure and utter shock.
Narrative text reflects his panic as he has never shared that secret with anyone. A tight clench sounds as the man asks who she is and how she could possibly know his past.
Eisel looks on with a blank and confused expression at his sudden intensity.
A soft what sounds as the man wonders if she is actually a divine being. A vision shows Kelium, a deity recognized as the guardian of daggers, beer, and treachery. Narrative text explains that a man named Vesemir was once a very dedicated follower of this deity. A pair of hands are shown tightly clasped together in a moment of focused intensity.
Eisel recalls from the story that he firmly believed the deity would always offer him protection.
A sudden gulp sounds as the man is reeling from the fact that he actually asked if she was God.
A subtle smirk sounds as Eisel maintains her confident and knowing composure.
A radiant twinkle sounds as Eisel beams, enjoying the power of her secret knowledge.
Narrative text admits she is lying about being divine, but feels she received a revelation from the author.
The red-haired man looks down with a quiet realization.
He stands silently with his back turned to the room.
Eisel watches him with wide and uncertain red eyes.
A soft drip sounds as a single tear falls from his chin.
A sudden trickle sounds as the man breaks down into tears. Eisel remains speechless as she observes his unexpected display of emotion. A loud sob sounds as the man cries while Eisel panics.
Eisel resolves to ignore her guilt and focus on her survival.
A soft pat sounds as she reaches out to comfort him. A sudden raise sounds as he lifts his head in shock.
Eisel offers him a gentle and radiant smile.
A heavy weep sounds as the man clasps his hands in gratitude.
A sudden grab sounds as he pulls her into a hug.
A loud squeeze sounds as he embraces her while sobbing loudly.
Eisel feels completely suffocated by his overwhelming display of devotion. Bright green foliage marks a brief shift in the scene's mood.
A soft wipe sounds as he apologizes for his previous behavior.
He pledges his absolute service to her as a lady messenger.
Eisel requests that he address her by her name instead.
She lets out a tired sigh, finding his intensity quite disappointing.
He gazes at her with a renewed and sparkling intensity.
A soft pat sounds as she touches his shoulder.
Eisel asks if he is actually paying attention to her.
She explains that the world is doomed to end very soon. Eisel stares with a very deep and serious expression.
She wonders if he finds her explanation completely ridiculous.
The man looks at her with an incredibly serious gaze.
Eisel is genuinely surprised that he seems to believe her.
A soft nod sounds as he agrees with absolute loyalty.
He asks what kind of assistance she specifically requires.
He notes that his only skills are those of an informant.
Eisel asks about his shift, and he says it just ended.
A quick pop sounds as he unbuttons his brown vest. A sudden toss sounds as he discards his outer clothing. A bright glint sounds as his eye shines with determination.
A loud clench sounds as he vows to achieve world peace. A fast rush sounds as he charges toward the exit. The patrons of the establishment watch him in utter bewilderment. A sharp whip sounds as a man inspects his resignation. A soft rustle sounds as the staff questions his sudden departure.
He beams with a radiant and incredibly joyful smile.
A loud slam sounds as they leave the building together.
He stretches while a surprised Eisel watches his boundless energy.
Eisel lets out a long and weary sigh. She considers that their success is the only thing that matters. Lush green trees stand tall against a bright blue sky.
Narrative text describes a massive and wealthy investment firm building.
He carries her while questioning how this saves the world. A sudden dash sounds as Eisel leads him inside. A noisy bustle and chatter sound within the grand building's interior. A clamor sounds as several nobles in fine clothing stand together in a large, well-lit hall. People move about the grand room, including a man in a brown tunic and an old man in white robes who bows deeply.
A quick glance and step sound as the red-haired man carries Eisel through the crowded building. Gold coins rain down as narrative text emphasizes that money is the ultimate goal.
A noisy bustle and chatter sound, while narrative text notes that everyone present is motivated by profit. A small smirk sounds as Eisel looks on with a confident expression.
A soft squeeze sounds as the girl holds her red pouch, recalling a promise that she could keep it all if she doubled the gold inside.
Thought bubbles reflect on how the strange assignment has resulted in enough wealth to purchase a house with plenty left over. Two-step sounds echo as the man carries her, certain that Duke Basquiela is fully aware of the situation. Narrative thought bubbles express doubt that the Duke expected the money to be doubled so rapidly. Eisel considers her options, noting she was told not to return if she lost all the gold, but reveals she cleverly left one piece at home. Inside a quiet room, Eisel corrects the man on how to address her, and he politely complies.
The red-haired man asks if she plans to invest as Eisel points toward a specific area of interest.
Standing before a notice board, Eisel states that her primary goal is to acquire more money.
The red-haired man looks down at her with a very confused expression. Eisel thinks to herself that despite his rough upbringing on the streets, the man is surprisingly naive.
A soft shh sounds as Eisel puts a finger to her lips, reminding him that they must keep her plans a secret.
The man's face flushes as he looks at her, feeling deeply moved by her mysterious behavior. Trembling with respect, the man listens as Eisel explains that money is the real solution to their problems. A quick glance sounds as Eisel looks away, noting that her knowledge of the future allows her to make prudent investments. Narrative text over a dark background explains that the world's end is a gradual process rather than an instant event. Cracks spread through the red ground as narrative text describes how a single problem can escalate into hundreds of disasters, starting with famine. Narrative text notes that the first signs of the coming catastrophe began with a bad harvest in the countryside. Eisel looks ahead with a focused gaze, pinpointing the exact location where she needs to make her next move. A document for the Revendell Co-op Guild is pinned to the board as Eisel realizes it is the place she sought. Eisel suggests entering the guild's office, and the red-haired man agrees to follow. A blonde woman with green eyes and freckles looks up from her desk with a surprised expression. A quick step sounds as they enter the office, where the woman asks their business and Eisel declares her intent to invest. The freckled woman looks at the young child with deep skepticism. Suggesting they visit the lobby instead for personal inquiries, the woman turns away while the red-haired man looks irritated.
A soft whish sounds as Eisel maintains a calm and steady gaze.
The woman looks back, appearing slightly flustered and confused by the girl's presence. A sudden halt sounds as the woman pauses her writing to ask if Eisel is a noble, to which the girl claims to be a fallen one. The woman beams with excitement, holding up a brochure to explain the guild's history and various investment products. A soft lift sounds as Eisel holds up her heavy pouch, recognizing that wealth dictates treatment in this society.
A heavy thud sounds as the pouch is placed on the desk while the woman explains the granary region is not very affluent.
A loud clatter sounds as gold bars spill out of the back, leaving the woman completely stunned. Everyone in the room is frozen in wide-eyed disbelief at the sight of the gleaming gold. Sweating and counting the bars, the woman asks with intense energy what kind of investment Eisel desires. A soft point sounds as Eisel indicates her specific choice on the documents. Eisel smiles radiantly as she announces her plan to use the gold to purchase grain specifically from the southern region. A bewildered look crosses the woman's face as she struggles to understand the strange request. The woman is completely baffled that Eisel wants to spend all her gold on grain at the current market rate. A soft ha sounds as Eisel considers the staff member's lack of professionalism. A soft plop sounds as Eisel settles into her seat. A soft rustle sounds as Eisel crosses her arms and stares ahead with an unimpressed look. Eisel's red eyes narrow with a look of intense and serious determination. Narrative text suggests it is best to speak directly with a supervisor in such a situation. A soft rub sounds as an older man with a mustache greets her politely, addressing her as a lady. A soft plop sounds as Eisel explains her grain strategy, and the supervisor promises her order will be ready in a week. A radiant twinkle sounds as Eisel beams with a satisfied and innocent-looking smile. A sudden raise sounds as the red-haired man lifts Eisel up, prompting her to ask if he has finished his task. Standing before a closed door, Eisel mentions another urgent task for him to complete, making him curious. The red-haired man asks for details, assuming she wants him to spread rumors to inflate the grain's selling price. Narrative text notes that baseless rumors generally have a negligible impact on actual market values. A sudden grin sounds as Eisel looks on with a knowing expression when he asks for his actual instructions. Eisel commands him to spread word of a massive upcoming festival in the capital city. The man is visibly perplexed, questioning how a public festival could possibly relate to the current price of grain. Eisel instructs him to emphasize that international visitors will attend, while she ponders the link between festivals and grain. A sudden hustle sounds amidst the green trees as the plan is set into motion. A soft chitter sounds near a quiet building as the scene transitions. A loud chatter and clamor sound as laborers work together to carry heavy sacks through the field. A blond man with glasses and red eyes looks on with a confused expression, asking for an explanation of the activity.
Surveying the storage unit filled with sacks, Eisel identifies the cargo as grain, while the blonde man wonders why it's being brought there.
Eisel casually explains that the massive amount of grain is there simply because she purchased it.
A sudden busy sounds as the blond man stands near Eisel while workers continue their labor in the background. The blond man asks where she got the money, recalling that their house was once plagued by extreme poverty. Stale bread falls into a pot as narrative text recounts their years of struggling with meager meals and thin soup. Thought bubbles wonder how House Spencer could suddenly be fully stocked, noting things didn't improve that much with his job. A thought bubble expresses a dark suspicion that Eisel might have obtained the funds through some sort of shady dealings. A quick whip sounds as the blond man reacts with a startled and sweating expression.
A thought bubble recalls hearing about criminals using innocent children to launder their illegal money.
Narrowing his eyes, the man considers that purchasing a commodity as common as grain would be a perfect front for money laundering. A sudden ah sounds as Eisel realizes her actions have cost him significant distress and worry. Eisel claims that Duke Basquiela provided the resources, shocking the blond man with the idea that his grace is involved. The blond man looks down with a pained and conflicted expression. A soft nod sounds as Eisel agrees with a confident and cheerful smile. A sudden sounds as the blond man reacts to Eisel's request to move some of the supplies. Narrative text explains that grain prices are usually stable, making it a very unlikely investment to double one's wealth quickly. A weary sigh sounds as the blond man rubs his face, wondering how he can help her succeed. A thought bubble reflects his growing belief that Eisel must have a secret plan behind her strange behavior. A woman with long white hair offers a gentle smile while patting Eisel's head affectionately. The blond man watches them closely, his expression still tinged with a bit of skepticism. A soft ha sounds as the man's tense expression finally begins to soften into a small smile.
A speech bubble appears as the blonde man asks if there is any way he can be of assistance.
The white-haired woman pulls Eisel into a warm hug while the blond man looks on thoughtfully. A sudden hear sounds Eisel hands a folded document over to the blond man. The document lists a watermill, a mill, and a malt house as key components of her next move. Eisel smiles brightly as the blond man begins to review the details on the paper. The blond man is left scratching his head in confusion while the woman continues to embrace the happy girl. A soft squeeze sounds as the woman agrees to the plan with a joyous and loving smile. A simple yes is spoken as the blond man finally accepts the situation with a calm gaze. A large open book sits on a desk next to an ornate inkwell and quill. A soft rustle sounds as the gray-haired Duke Basquiela inspects a report with a serious and focused look. He learns she used his gold to buy grain from the southern granary and quietly acknowledges the update. A thought bubble notes that he never provided her with any instruction regarding such specific business tactics.
A thoughtful sounds as the Duke narrows his red eyes in deep, intrigued contemplation.
Narrative text confirms that her education to date has never included advanced principles of investment. A sudden tap sounds as he drums his fingers, questioning how she learned about futures trading and her ultimate motivation. Narrative text questions if she truly intends to invest in a non-volatile commodity like grain. Duke Basquiela responds to the news with a quiet chuckle. Touching his chin thoughtfully, the Duke admits that this unpredictable child never fails to surprise him. Narrative text over a bright background records the Duke's decision to leave her alone, confident she will be fine. An older butler bows respectfully and notes that the Duke has been smiling much more lately. A hand rests on a desk as a sudden quick tap sounds. The butler reports that Lord Raven is undergoing daily discipline to ensure there is no repeat of his previous mistake. The Duke asks if he is truly spending all his time confined to his quarters while learning he hasn't been doing anything else. Books sit on a rotating shelf as the butler explains that Raven takes all his meals in his room under the confinement order. A soft sigh sounds as the Duke rubs his forehead in frustration. Reflecting on the past, the Duke considers Gerald a fool for being inferior to his brother Eonork in almost every way. Scenes from the past show Eonork taking bold risks while Gerald always preferred the safest possible route. Gerald is shown as a typical arrogant noble who looks down on the weak and grovels before the powerful. A soft haw sounds as the Duke wonders how Gerald could remain so fundamentally unchanged over the years. A blonde man with freckles and a ponytail is confused that Eisel wants to sign a contract for the use of a watermill.
Narrative text explains that watermills are common in the area and currently suffer from low demand.
Gesturing to the mill yard, the freckled man wonders why she wants a contract and asks for her reasoning. Looking at him with a serious expression, Eisel simply states that she needs it. Leaning in, the freckled man explains that she can use the mill anytime for a small fee without needing a formal contract.
Eisel smiles radiantly, insisting she still wants the contract and offers to make a deposit immediately.
A soft gulp sounds as the man listens to her proposal.
Eisel holds up 2 fingers and suggests a specific amount for the deposit.
A soft rummage sounds as Eisel searches her pouch while the man assumes the sum will be underwhelming.
A heavy dun sounds as Eisel reveals 2 massive gold bars and asks if they will suffice.
A soft rustle sounds as the greedy older man stammers in shock, quickly promising to reserve the mill for 10 full days.
A thought bubble notes that the mill usually only makes 20 silver a week, making 2 gold bars an incredible fortune.
Eisel beams with a satisfied and innocent-looking smile. Sunlight filters into the room where various barrels and glass bottles are stored. A soft tap and straighten sound as Eisel prepares the official documentation for the mill contract. A soft rub sounds as the older man massages his hands together in pure, greedy delight.
Narrative text confirms they will wait for her signal to begin the work. A sudden turn sounds as the blonde man with glasses and a ponytail looks over his shoulder.
Eisel tells the man that he will soon understand the true purpose behind her strange investments.
A sudden wow sounds as Eisel raises her arms in excitement and suggests they head out.
A soft clasp sounds as the blonde man gently takes the young girl's hand in his own. The blonde man watches Eisel with a quiet and thoughtful expression. Eisel looks ahead with a focused and determined gaze. A soft hic sounds as a blonde girl with blue eyes and pigtails stands crime. The blonde girl demands to know what happened while Eisel looks at her with a confused expression. A soft hung sounds as the pigtail-haired girl wails that Eisel missed class for 2 weeks without sending any word.
A soft hic sounds as the girl continues to sob uncontrollably.
A dark loom sounds as the girl threatens to tear apart anyone who might have harmed her friend. Chibi-style Eisel nervously reassures her crying friend that she is perfectly fine and nothing bad occurred.
A sudden whip sounds as the blonde girl notices the workers and asks what kind of labor they are performing.
A loud bustle and clamor sound as workers in the background move boxes and heavy sacks of goods.
Eisel explains that the activity relates to the task assigned to her by Duke Basquiela while sacks are stacked nearby.
A sudden heaped sounds as the pigtailed-haired girl gazes at the massive mountain of grain sacks in the warehouse. The blonde girl stares at the scene with wide-eyed disbelief. A sudden serious sounds as the blonde girl asks if the workers are actually slaves.
Eisel is shocked by the question and reminds her that slavery was abolished many years ago.
A promotional banner invites readers to search for comics on a popular website.
A thoughtful sounds as Eisel ponders her strategy of cornering and hoarding the market while her friend asks for an explanation of what that means.
A sudden oh sounds as Eisel looks at her friend's face, realizing she needs to simplify her explanation.
Eisel promises to use simpler terms as she invites her friend to follow her inside.
A sudden oh sounds as the blonde girl finally begins to understand and agrees with the logic.
Encouraging her friend, the blonde girl leans in with a sudden lean and clasps Eisel's hands with a soft clasp, reassuring her that everything will be fine. With a radiant smile, the blonde girl declares that Eisel is the most intelligent person she knows and that everything will work out. Eisel offers a small, grateful smile at her friend's unwavering confidence in her.
A moment of sweet affection as Eisel gently ruffles and strokes her friend's hair with a soft ruffle, stroke, and pat.
The blonde girl relays a message from Mr. Velen asking if Eisel can meet with him tomorrow. Eisel questions the purpose of the meeting with a curious while her friend admits she doesn't know anything else. Touching her chin, Eisel wonders if there was an issue with the recent test they both took while letting out a quiet Standing tall, Eisel prepares to leave as she confirms she has another destination in mind. The curious blonde girl asks if she can accompany Eisel on her next errand. Eisel cheerfully agrees to let her friend come on. Eisel takes a cautious peek, her red eye narrowing as she considers the situation with a thoughtful
A quiet gaze through a window pane captures a glimpse of a carriage outside.
Eisel notices the presence of Lancia's guard standing watch near the carriage.
A satisfied smile plays on her lips as Eisel realizes the guard's presence means she won't need a mercenary. With everything settled, they prepare to set off in the waiting carriage.
The blonde girl shakes and trembles with fear as they arrive at their destination with a sudden shake and tremble.
A dark and gloomy tavern filled with rough-looking men sends chills down their spines as they experience sudden gloom and chills. The patrons whisper and mutter among themselves as they hear a soft step, wondering why two children have entered such a place.
A man's hand holding a document asks if Eisel is someone named Rebecca. The man with the ponytail flips through the document with a serious expression and a sudden flip.
Eisel firmly clarifies that she isn't anyone's secret child, while the man reacts with a startled gasp and a sudden crumple of the paper.
Relieved by her answer, the man introduces himself as Randall and offers a handshake.
Eisel asks Randall if he is indeed the most renowned bootlegger in the capital, prompting him to ask who told her that.
Eisel points out that his identity is obvious because he has a sign displayed right at the entrance.
Randall questions her interest, doubting that two young nobles would have any need for cheap bootleg liquor.
When another patron asks if they are on an errand, Eisel clarifies that the truth is the exact opposite.
Randall and his associates freeze in surprise with a sudden freeze as Eisel boldly states she is there because they will need her.
A hand suddenly grabs a handful of sausages with a sudden grab while a voice shouts an insult.
Total chaos erupts in the tavern as patrons begin pelting Randall with food and insults, filling the air with sudden sounds of pow, wham, whack, bam, thwack, and smack.
As the tavern erupts into a food fight with a sudden swoosh, swish, and toss, Eisel notes that the men are actually behaving quite rationally for being drunk so early, while her friend lets out a sudden eek. Randall cries out in pain and confusion with sounds of pow, whack, and ow, pleading for the angry mob to stop their assault.
A pale hand belonging to a woman wearing black lace rests upon a wooden surface with a soft swish.
A stunning woman in an elegant red and black dress arrives with a loud clack, identified as Rebecca by the crowd.
An out-of-breath Randall tells Rebecca that Eisel claims her husband is the one who needs her assistance. Rebecca ignores Randall's desperate pleas for a chance to explain as she begins to walk away. Rebecca comes to a sudden halt, leaving a sobbing Randall with a sudden hic and the two girls watching her intently.
Rebecca turns her attention toward the children and asks for their identity.
Rebecca flinches in surprise with a sudden flinch when Eisel addresses her formally as Miss.
A subtle blush creeps onto Rebecca's cheeks as she clears her throat in response with a soft ahem. Rebecca finally smiles and confirms her name, asking once more who the young girl is.
Eisel makes a startling prediction that Rebecca will soon need to manufacture a massive amount of illegal liquor.
Eisel maintains a focused and determined expression while she speaks to the tavern owner.
Eisel extends a business card with a sudden extent and instructs Rebecca to contact her when the time for production arrives.
Reviewing the card, Rebecca asks if there is any other business the young girl wishes to conduct.
Rising to leave with a sudden rise, Eisel coldly informs the woman that she has no further need for their services.
Eisel looks on with a focused and silent gaze.
Rebecca flinches as Eisel tells her to take Lancia and depart.
A hand holds a business card from the Agricultural Association. The room remains quiet, filled with books and elegant furniture.
A hand delicately lifts a dark-rimmed teacup.
Velen takes a slow sip of his tea with a soft raise sounding.
Eisel stares blankly as the tension in the room grows.
Velen notes the passing of time as he continues to drink.
Eisel wonders why he is delaying and if the test is the cause.
Feeling the pressure, Chibi Eisel trembles with visible nerves and anxiety. Velen peers over his glasses and questions her true identity.
A sudden jolt of surprise hits Eisel as she hears his inquiry.
With a soft clasp of his hands, Velen explains how his opinion of her has shifted.
Eisel feels confused after being called an oddball, questioning if it was an insult.
The atmosphere shifts as Velen moves closer with a sudden lean.
Velen maintains a stern and unreadable profile.
Eisel's heart beats rapidly with a heavy thump-thump sounding.
A soft tap sounds as Velen places his hand over her graded test paper.
Velen asks why she intentionally marked correct answers as wrong.
The realization that he was referring to the test results dawns on Eisel. Velen waits patiently for her to provide an explanation.
Eisel begins her defense, claiming the reason for her actions is quite simple.
Looking away, Eisel prepares to reveal her motivations. A flashback shows Eisel using a quill to purposefully sabotage her own exam paper.
Eisel reflects on how her habit from her previous life caused problems and regrets her lack of caution.
Velen asks for further clarification on her reasoning.
Eisel explains that her family's low status leads other nobles to look down on her.
Eisel watches him with a wary gaze, wishing she had been more careful.
Velen asks if she sabotaged her work specifically to avoid unwanted attention.
Velen brings his hands together with a soft swish.
Velen asks if someone influenced her, but she insists it was her own idea.
A faint, satisfied smile touches Velen's lips.
Velen looks at her with a much warmer and friendlier expression.
Eisel asks if her confession will negatively impact her test score.
Velen reassures her and notes that any other student would have seemed to be mocking him.
Eisel blinks in confusion as she processes his response.
Velen tilts his head back with a soft lean sounding.
Looking at Velen, Eisel is reminded of a significant event from the past.
Narrative text reveals the connection to the rebel forces. The text explains the rebellion's origins and Velen's leadership role in crowning a new ruler. Velen offers to personally tutor her so she doesn't have to worry about the other students. Velen's eyes sharpen as he focuses his attention solely on her.
Eisel looks back with wide, curious eyes. Velen directly asks if she has any interest in becoming his pupil.
Eisel lets out a cheerful sound as she beams with excitement. The blonde-haired Lancia arrives with a joyful greeting.
Eisel appears completely exhausted, stumbling forward with a sudden stagger. Lancia lets out a gasp, horrified by Eisel's haggard appearance. Eisel brushes off her concern, explaining she has simply been very busy. Lancia excitedly mentions that the festival has begun and invites her to go together.
A beautiful green floral dress is revealed with a sudden ta-da.
Lancia's blue eyes sparkles with immense wonder.
Colorful balloons drift over a festive cityscape.
Lancia clasps her hands together with a hopeful and excited expression.
Looking apologetic, Eisel says she doesn't think she'll be able to attend the festivities.
Lancia is crushed by the rejection and desperately asks for a reason.
Eisel peeks into the room while a quiet step sounds. A wooden desk is buried under 3 massive stacks of paperwork. Lancia asks about the strange furniture placement, while Eisel clarifies that the stacks are all business contracts. Narrative text explains that a desk was placed at the entrance to manage the constant stream of prospective buyers.
A small, satisfied smile crosses Eisel's face.
Narration reveals that the business grew far beyond any initial expectations.
While her workers celebrate their success, an exhausted and overworked Eisel scribbles through a flood of inquiries with a soft scratch.
Narrative text explains that the festival has caused a massive shortage of beer and bread ingredients.
A carriage wheel emits a loud creak as Lancia admits her confusion.
A brown-haired man steps out of a carriage with a heavy step.
The man looks around with a curious and slightly nervous expression.
Grabbing a document with a sudden grab, Eisel asks if the man is the prospective buyer, and he confirms.
Eisel professionally requests the man's name and address for the record.
Lifting the paper with a sudden raise, Eisel demands a deposit of half the total price, leaving the buyer in shock. Eisel promises that his items will safely arrive within 4 days despite the high demand.
Lancia looks completely overwhelmed and dizzy by the rapid business negotiations.
The buyer hesitates and mentions that the prices seem rather high. The man points out that her rates are currently double the average trading price.
He continues his complaint, arguing that the prices are excessive even for a supply shortage.
Eisel listens with a calm and silent profile.
With a sharp stare, Eisel counters by asking if he also sells his goods at 3 times the price during festivals.
Eisel leaves the man dumbstruck by explaining that grain costs have increased significantly due to a poor harvest. Firmly standing her ground, Eisel states she cannot change the price and suggests he leave if he is unhappy. The man offers a respectful bow before departing. A sudden whoosh sounds as Eisel explains to a bewildered Lancia that this has become her daily routine.
Letting out a tired ha, Eisel gives herself a small neck massage.
Eisel apologizes once more, explaining she must work because her parents are laboring and she needs to take responsibility.
Lancia looks at her friend with a sudden sense of realization.
Lancia takes a quick glance toward the busy desk.
The sight of the massive paperwork stacks remains daunting. Eisel looks at her friend with a questioning gaze. Lancia suddenly turns and shouts for someone named Freddy. A dark-haired knight named Freddy arrives with a sudden rush. Eisel is confused by Lancia's orders as the knight pledges his obedience. Lancia is suddenly determined, her eyes glowing with a sudden fwip. Viscount Spencer wipes his brow while noting the endless nature of his work. The warehouse is filled with crates and sacks of grain. Spencer worries he might collapse from fatigue before finishing his task. Despite the exhaustion, he resolves to keep moving with a sudden swish. The Viscount gasps for air as he pushes himself. Stacks of golden green sacks represent a prosperous business opportunity. Letting out a heavy the Viscount takes a step forward to move another heavy sack. A man wearing an elegant ruby brooch arrives with a sudden step.
Spencer stops and glances back with a look of surprise.
The purple-haired Velen asks the blonde-haired man if he is Viscount Spencer.
Velen explains with a warm smile that he has arrived at Lady Lancia's request. Viscount Spencer is momentarily silenced by the mention of Lady Lancia's name. Spencer wonders if they have sent yet another person to disrupt his work in the warehouse. Narrative text explains how desperate nobles would cause a ruckus demanding grain and flour. Turning with a sudden flip sounding, Spencer notes that this is the 3rd person to arrive today. Spencer is confused as Velen presents a document with a sudden raise. A gloved hand strikes a pile of grain with a heavy thud sounding. A soft rustle sounds as Spencer begins to examine the presented paper. Beaming with joy, Velen asks if he has read the letter written by Eisel. A sharp snap of fingers echoes through the air. A loud rush sounds as a group of people begins to run forward.
A swarm of workers begins to hustle and bustle as they move the heavy sacks of grain.
A Spencer stands stunned as a series of quick steps sound while the workers take over.
Bringing his hands together with a soft clap sounding, Velen announces that they will take charge from here.
The young, white-haired Eisel watches the scene with a focused and silent gaze.
Narration explains that Eisel sent people to help her parents, which expedited their business affairs.
A soft step sounds as the narrative text notes how useful Lancia's assistance proved to be.
Holding 2 warm loaves of bread, the blonde-haired Lancia smiles happily.
Sitting on a wooden bench, Lancia mentions she knows the place while Eisel looks on.
Taking a bite with a soft crunch sounding, Eisel explains that she provides supplies to that location.
A soft chatter sounds as the narrative text mentions everyone is enjoying the festival.
While eating with a soft chew sounding, the girls discuss how Eisel's father is attending an imperial banquet.
Letting out a cheerful hee-hee sounding, Lancia explains she only went on the first day so she could spend time with Eisel.
A subtle blush touches Eisel's cheeks as she listens to her friend's kind words.
Taking another bite with a soft munch sounding, Eisel reflects on the true nature of friendship.
Looking toward her friend, Eisel mentions she has been wondering about something. Licking her finger with a soft lick sounding, Eisel continues to ponder her private thoughts. Narrative text reveals her plan to double her money by selling the remaining grain to the countryside.
Leaning in with a soft lean sounding, Eisel mentions returning to her lessons as she notices cream on her face.
Lancia suddenly reaches out to grab Eisel's hand, telling her to wait.
Lancia uses a handkerchief to clean Eisel's face with a soft rub and wipe sounding.
Feeling flustered, Eisel looks away and accepts the help from her friend.
Lancia maintains a very serious and focused expression while cleaning the girl's face.
Lancia beams with a bright smile, announcing she has finished cleaning the spot.
The 2 girls continue to eat together with a soft nom sounding.
Eisel stands up from the bench with a sudden rise sounding.
A sudden dash sounds as a tanned boy in ornate clothes runs past Eisel.
A soft wobble sounds as Eisel is nearly knocked over by the sudden impact.
The tanned boy is soaked in purple liquid and shouts in frustration as he realizes Eisel is there. Looking irritated, the boy holds an empty cup and glares at the young girl.
With a sharp glare, the boy demands to know why Eisel is just standing there without reacting.
Eisel is bewildered, wondering why he is angry when he was the one who bumped into her first.
The boy demands an immediate apology, but Eisel defiantly asks why she should provide one. Looking irritated, the boy questions if her behavior is due to her youth or uneducated status.
Eisel wonders if he is assuming she is a commoner because of her simple dress. Pointing a finger with a sudden point sounding, the boy calls her a peasant and threatens her life.
Guards arrive with a sudden swish, clarifying Eisel's noble status while the boy remains unimpressed.
Snickering at her, the boy insults her clothes and calls her family a fallen noble house.
The boy turns with a sudden turn and orders his dark-haired attendant to handle the situation.
Eisel and Lancia startle with a sudden jolt sounding as heavy steps approach the curtain.
A dark-clothed man reaches out with a sudden reach, pleading for forgiveness for his actions.
Eisel watches the confrontation with a tense, wide-eyed expression.
The dark-haired attendant turns away from the scene as the atmosphere grows heavy. A banner featuring a golden lion emblem billows with a loud flap sounding.
Eisel's red eye widens in shock as someone reacts with a sudden exclamation.
Knights draw their swords with a sharp swing sounding, cornering their target.
The tanned boy flinches as a blade moves past him with a sudden whish sounding.
A knight holds a blade to a man's neck with a sudden flinch sounding, warning him not to move.
Staring with cold eyes, a knight threatens to tear the man apart if he tries to resist.
The tanned boy winces as blood drips from his nose with a sudden throb sounding.
Eisel remains paralyzed with horror as she witnesses the violent turn of events.
A hand seizes the tanned boy's collar with a sudden, forceful grasp sounding.
A young boy watches the confrontation with a sudden, angry clench sounding.
The blonde boy gasps with a sudden puff sounding, appearing completely exhausted.
Wiping away sweat with a soft rub and wipe sounding, the boy complains about Carl's tendency to disappear.
The boy's head is met with a sudden, comforting pat sounding.
First Prince Gladiol Becker asks why the boy is alone and where Carl has gone.
Gladiol ruffles the boy's hair with a gentle caress and ruffle sounding.
The boy looks toward a tall tower, insisting he isn't worried about the missing prince.
Letting out a heavy sigh sounding, the boy scratches his head in frustration.
Narrative text details how Archduke Byron stormed the palace to confront the emperor over the threat to his son. An aura of heavy doom sounding lingers as the emperor manages to calm the Archduke. Narrative text explains that while the Archduke was appeased, he still tightened his son's protection.
The blonde boy is distressed as narration describes the overzealous guards terrifying the local shopkeepers and crowds.
Gladiol looks on with a soft expression while agreeing with the boy's assessment.
Narration recounts a nobleman being captured and tortured after reaching for a gift for Carl.
A menacing message warns that any perceived threat to Carl will result in immediate bloodshed.
Both boys are struck by a sudden, intense chills sounding as they contemplate the situation. Letting out a shaky ha sounding, the boy hopes the guards won't resort to actually killing anyone. A final, desperate internal plea asks for Carl to avoid any further trouble. A soft murmur and whisper sounding drift through the peaceful, festive garden setting. Carl trembles with a drip sounding as blood falls from his nose in total shock. Carl screams in a sudden, furious rage, demanding to know what is happening and threatening his attacker. A silver-haired boy and Carl stare at each other with a sudden blink and ha sounding. The silver-haired boy softly denies that he is mocking the other person. Carl demands to be released, shouting that he is royalty visiting for sightseeing. Carl orders the other to let him go while the boy asks if he is truly a prince. Carl flinches with a sudden exclamation, taken aback by the boy's sharp questioning. The silver-haired boy stares intently, noting he has never encountered a prince like Carl before. He explains that as a member of House Byron, he is well acquainted with royal circles and events. The boy leans lower with a soft, low sounding, scrutinizing Carl's appearance closely. A deep dun sounding emphasizes the boy's insulting suggestion that Carl is a prince in name only. Eisel tries to stifle a laugh with a sudden puffed sounding as Lancia looks on bewildered. Carl's face turns a deep red with a sudden flush sounding as he hurls insults at the boy. The silver-haired boy offers a faint apology for his lack of recognition while maintaining a sharp gaze. Carl looks incredibly flustered, suspecting the other boy is intentionally making fun of him. The dark-haired attendant arrives with a sudden step sounding as the crowd continues to mutter and murmur. Carl turns with a sudden exclamation, surprised by the arrival of the newcomer. Carl promises the boy will regret his insolence, while an arriving knight asks His Highness if anything is wrong. Looking toward the tanned boy, the freckled attendant laments his inability to stay out of trouble, while the prince demands his enemies be killed for humiliating him. A knight demands the attackers identify themselves immediately, but the tanned prince continues to scream for their total slaughter. The freckled attendant issues a final warning for the attackers to reveal their identities before he is forced to take action. Letting out a heavy ha sounding, the dark-clad attendant identifies his group as being from House Byron. The freckled attendant's eyes widen in absolute shock upon hearing the mention of House Byron. The silver-haired Carl stares forward with an intense, glowing golden gaze. A dark curtain billows with a sudden, loud flap sounding as the attendants watch the scene unfold. Letting out a sharp gasp sounding, the freckled man reacts with utter terror as he realizes the gravity of the situation. A grand golden frame reveals a coat of arms with a deep dun sounding, identifying the group as the legendary Black Lions. Several blades are held against the neck of the dark-haired woman as the narrative questions why the Black Lions would target Prince Pietro. Narrative text explains that House Byron's Black Lions are known across the continent for being vicious and merciless killers. The freckled attendant desperately tries to de-escalate the situation, suggesting they all take a step back and resolve the misunderstanding. While the tanned prince insists there is no misunderstanding and demands death, the female attendant warns him against provoking House Byron. Prince Pietro screams in a furious rage about his attempted murder, but his attendants grit their teeth, knowing they are at a severe disadvantage. A soft murmur and mutter sounding rises from the crowd as Pietro continues to order the execution of the attackers. Letting out a pained groan sounding, the freckled man realizes that engaging the Black Lions would likely result in their deaths. A pair of feet move forward with a sudden, firm step sounding. The freckled attendant turns with a sudden turn sounding, his face dripping with nervous fleck. A blade moves with a sudden, sharp whip sounding near the dark-haired woman as she reacts in surprise. A cloak flutters with a sudden, graceful swish sounding, revealing ornate golden jewelry. Walking away with a rhythmic step sounding, the blonde-haired boy moves past the stunned attendants.
The tanned prince demands to know who is interfering, ordering his death as well, while the attendants sweat and plead for him to stop.
Moving with a sudden swish sounding, the blonde-haired boy commands the group to leave and take the prince with them. Prince Pietro screams in a blind, furious yell, sounding, demanding everyone be killed immediately. Letting out a heavy huff and puff sounding, the tanned boy is met with an insult as the newcomer calls him the Brawdy Prince of Peyota. The blonde-haired boy warns that those wishing to avoid death for attempting to kill imperial family members in foreign lands should listen. The blonde boy offers a calm and confident smile. Breathing with a shaky puff and huff sounding, Pietro is paralyzed with shock upon realizing he is facing a member of the imperial family. Turning his attention away, the blonde boy calls Carl by name, surprising the silver-haired child. The blonde boy continues to smile with a gentle expression. Carl stares at the newcomer with a silent and focused gaze. A hand moves with a sudden swish sounding as Pietro remains frozen in shock.
With a friendly expression, the blonde boy beckons for Carl to follow her.
Carl begins to move with a sudden, quick trot summon. Moving on tiptoe, the freckled attendant retreats as the blonde boy gives Carl a sudden, gentle caress and ruffle sounding on the head.
The blonde boy looks back over his shoulder with a sudden, sharp glance sounding.
A sudden dash sounding occurs as the group of people quickly flees the scene in a panic.
The blonde boy maintains a calm demeanor while continuing to pat Carl on the head.
Eisel and Lancia stand side by side, appearing completely dumbfounded by the strange interaction they just witnessed.
Eisel looks on with a bewildered expression as the two boys walk away together.
Walking away with a steady step sounding, the blonde boy suggests they find a better place to talk.
The silver-haired Eisel watches their departure with a serious and focused gaze.
Narrative text reveals the blonde boy's identity as Gladiel Becker, the last emperor of the empire. A chilling narrative text explains that Gladiel was a tragic figure who was eventually executed by guillotine for failing to protect his empire. Gladiel's hand connects with Carl's head with a sudden, sharp whip and slap sounding, causing the boy to cry out in pain. Gladiel scolds Carl for constantly wandering off alone, while the silver-haired boy complains about being hurt.
Eisel identifies the older boy as Ismail, the fifth prince of the empire.
As Carl begins to droop with shame, Ishmael continues to nag and scold him about being entrusted to his care.
Letting out a tired ha sounding, Ismail reminds Carl of the massive security detail required for his protection and Gladiel's role in his festival attendance. Carl looks down with a flustered expression, unable to find a proper excuse for his behavior. Ismail looks at Carl with a sudden quick glance sounding, while the silver-haired boy takes a sudden nervous peek sounding.
While Lancia admits to being frightened, Eisel asks if she is feeling all right.
Ismail concludes that the boy followed the girl while thinking about the situation.
Moving closer with a sudden firm lean sounding, Ismail scrutinizes the silver-haired boy.
Ismail suggests the boy's reaction wasn't merely from seeing a friendly face, leaving him bewildered.
Staring intently, Ismail mentions hearing that Carl investigated the girl's background, prompting the boy to ask how he knew. Ismail notes the boy's obvious interest in the rumors spreading through the Archduchy, leading Carl to ask what they are.
Ismail mentions rumors of the young lord's first love, causing Carl to react with a sudden shock jolt and a frantic denial.
Ismail offers a dismissive agreement as he turns away with a sudden, quick swish sounding.
Eisel looks on with a surprised expression.
Ismail offers a formal bow sounding. Eisel observes that the 10-year-old is greeting her with the grace and politeness of an adult. Greeting the prince with a sudden, polite touch sounding, Eisel notes that they seem to encounter each other often.
Eisel remarks on the rarity of meeting a royal of his stature.
Ismail maintains a serious and silent expression.
Ismail asks if something is wrong, and Eisel replies that his maturity never ceases to amaze her.
Eisel notes his adult-like tone and demeanor despite only being 8 years old.
Lancia smiles brightly while agreeing that Eisel is very mature.
Lancia mentions the Duke's adoration for Ezel's intelligence, while Ismail notes that she is very popular.
Eisel appreciates the kind words and notes the prince is also adult-like, but he insists he is all grown up.
Ismail maintains a proud and confident posture.
Eisel observes that children generally dislike being treated like children.
Eisel looks away with a contemplative expression.
Eisel thanks the silver-haired boy, causing him to react with a sudden, nervous, startled sounding as he claims he only did what was necessary.
Narrative text suggests something horrible might have happened without his intervention.
Eisel admits that they were not actually in any big danger.
Carl's face turns red with a sudden, intense blush and flush sounding.
Eisel offers a gentle and knowing smile. Carl looks down as narrative text describes a cold and heartless person.
Ismail looks on with a calm expression.
Ismail expresses relief that the girls are unharmed, surprising them with a sudden, sharp gasp sounding as they realize he knows their names.
Ismail offers a warm and friendly smile.
Ismail is glad they are all right and credits Lord Byron for their safety. Ismail gives Carl a sudden, comforting pat sounding while reminding him that knowing how to accept thanks is a virtue.
Carl tells Eisel he is happy she is safe. Eisel smiles warmly with a sudden, gentle smile sounding.
Both children offer a sudden, polite bow sounding to each other.
Carl walks away with a sudden, joyful beam sounding as the others laugh and smile. Ismail notes they must leave as it is getting late, and Carl reluctantly agrees.
Carl looks back with a lingering gaze.
Eisel waves goodbye while asking to meet again.
Carl stares back with a focused expression.
Carl calls out to Eisel with a sudden quick raise sounding.
Carl explains with a sudden nervous fidget sounding that he won't see her for a while due to a 10-year term at the Empire's borders.
Eisel realizes this refers to mandatory military service.
Carl hesitantly mentions he has a request since they might not have another chance to meet.
Carl's face turns red with a sudden, tight squeeze sounding.
Carl suddenly shouts a proposal for them to marry in the future. Eisel is left standing in absolute shock. Lancia and Ismail react with a sudden, stunned gape sounding to the bold declaration.
Stunned by the unexpected and bold proposal,
Lord Byron appears incredibly flustered and nervous. He declares her the most incredible person he has ever met.
He continues his heartfelt and loud confession. Eisel is left momentarily speechless by his earnest words. He admits his constant thoughts were of her after they separated.
He begs for a marriage promise while she considers how to reply. Eisel agrees to marry him in the future.
Lord Byron is overcome with shock and pure happiness. She challenges his memory while he vows never to forget her. She internally doubts the longevity of childhood promises over a decade.
While the boy fidgets, she accepts her role as his first crush.
With a sudden metallic clink sounding, he presents a silver cross. Eisel holds the boy's token of their future agreement. Lord Byron bids her a final and polite farewell. With a sudden small nod sounding, she says they bye. The boy offers one last longing and happy look.
A sudden, joyful beam sounding reflects his pure excitement.
He is guided away as the festival continues around them. Turning with a sudden, elegant swish sounding, Eisel moves on.
Moving with a sudden quick step sounding, Lancia joins her. Lancia checks on her friend as they depart the area.
15 years pass and Eisel has matured into a woman.
She confronts the grown-up Lord Byron with playful familiarity. The grown man looks on with cold and stern indifference.
He reacts with a sudden, intense glare sounding. Their tense moment is broken by a sudden, sharp smack sounding.
Moving with a sudden, dismissive pull sounding, she accepts his silence.
She notes the long passage of 15 years since they met.
Lord Byron remains silent as she addresses him.
With a sudden, rhythmic top sounding, she references their contact.
She asserts that their agreement is now irrevocable. He observes her with deep-seated suspicion and focus. He demands to know why he should trust her motives.
He points out the lack of credibility in her name and status.
Eisel watches him with a calculating and knowing look. Moving with a sudden, confident raise sounding, she prepares to counter him. She declares her true identity as a legitimate countess. The man listens intently as she explains her decision.
With a sudden, decisive clack sounding, she secures her purse.
A sudden, radiant glint sounding reveals the silver cross from their past.
Another sudden, sharp glint sounding highlights the ruby jewel.
Narrative text identifies the jewelry as the emblem of House Basquiela.
With a sudden, proud rise sounding, she claims her powerful lineage.
Letting out a sudden, cunning grin sounding, she proves her worth. Letting out a sudden, tired ha sounding, he recognizes her authority.
Memory reveals the silent presence of Duke Basquiela in Parliament.
Narrative text explains the Duke's legendary refusal to speak during sessions.
Duke Basquiela looms with a terrifying and cold presence.
A sudden, sharp realization forms as the question of his long-term planning arises.
The silver-haired Eisel mentions that the merchants she works with are also part of this scheme.
She internally wonders if mentioning her partnership with the rebel leader Velen would end their civil discussion.
With a sudden, quick whip sounding, she turns back to mention the many others involved while the gray-haired man watches.
As she offers to take one last question, her red shoes stands out against the tiled floor.
The man remains silent, his heavy boots rooted to the spot as the tension hangs in the air. Taking a sudden, heavy step sounding, he asks what she truly hopes to gain from all of this.
Eisel offers a serene and confident smile in response to his interrogation.
She makes a sudden, deliberate reach sounding toward his open palm while correcting his assumption.
With a sudden, quiet drop sounding, she places an object into his hand. She explains that the focus should not be on her gain, but rather on what he can achieve.
The gray-haired man stands rooted, processing the shift in their complex power dynamic.
A sudden, sharp metallic click sounding underscores the finality of her statement.
The man stands tall, his gaze fixed on her retreating figure as he remains motionless.
She comes to a sudden, abrupt halt sounding before the large, ornate doors of the room.
Eisel glances back over her shoulder with a playful and knowing look.
The heavy doors shut with a sudden, final close sounding, leaving the man alone in the hall.
He stands in silence, the weight of their interaction lingering in the grand space.
A close-up reveals his focused and contemplative expression as he looks down.
A sudden, bright glint sounding comes from the silver cross resting in the palm of his hand.
He makes a sudden, slow raise sounding of his head, his eyes reflecting a new determination. Letting out a sudden, firm clench sounding, he grips the token tightly in his fist.
A carriage wheel rolls over the path with a sudden, rhythmic clunk sounding.
A blonde butler offers a warm greeting and welcomes the lady back home.
Stepping into the foyer with a sudden, light step sounding, Eisel asks if her master has made contact.
The maid informs her that there has been no word yet, holding the lady's discarded coat.
Exhausted by the day's events, the silver-haired woman decides she desperately needs to relax.
The scene shifts to a large, luxurious bathroom where she seeks peace in a warm bath.
Letting out a sudden, long sigh sounding, she leans back and lets the water soothe her.
Her red eyes remain wide and thoughtful as she stares into the distance.
She lets out another sudden, tired sigh while reflecting on how 15 years changed a timid boy into a heartless man.
Narrative text notes that 15 years was also plenty of time for Eisel to undergo her own transformation.
Following the Duke's assignment, her business expanded rapidly, merging smaller mills into a powerful guild. A memory shows the adoring Duke Basquiela giving a sudden, playful swing sounding to a younger Eisel, promising his full support. Narrative text explains that with her knowledge and the Duke's backing, she amassed incredible wealth. Back in the present, she sinks into the water with a sudden, rhythmic bubble and gurgle sounding. Duke Basquiela appears in a portrait or memory, looking regal and authoritative. Narrative explains that while Eisel was once a key figure, she has now taken full control of the business empire. Sitting at her grand desk, the matured Eisel reviews documents with a sharp and professional eye.
Her work is interrupted by a sudden, sharp knock sounding on the office door.
She tells the visitor to come in and asks the butler to summon someone named Vesemir.
She mentions overhearing troubling rumors on her way home. In the shadows, citizens whisper in fear about the world coming to an end.
Narrative explains that a red-haired individual named Vesemir works to control the capital's flow of information.
Eisel pauses, her expression turning somber as she prepares to ask another question.
She looks down with a heavy heart, her red eyes filled with concern. She asks the blonde butler about the condition of his mother. He responds with a sudden, mournful shake of his head, indicating no improvement. Eisel's face clouds with sadness for her loyal attendant's loss. Narrative text reveals that the woman's health eventually gave out and she collapsed. Narration notes the harsh winter has worsened her mother's condition, making a departure impossible despite medical efforts.
Eisel requests her butler help her father care for her ailing mother while she manages her affairs.
The blonde butler informs Eisel that Lady Lancia has invited her to a luncheon, which she happily accepts.
With a sudden, decisive clack sounding, the butler prepares to organize the meeting as he exits the room.
Letting out a sudden, elegant swish sounding, the silver-haired woman releases a weary sigh of exhaustion.
She makes a sudden, quick raised sounding of her hands to her face, trying to clear her mind.
Leaning against her desk with a tired breath, she realizes she is finally close to achieving her goal. Her solitude is broken by a sudden, rhythmic knock sounding, followed by the butler announcing an unexpected guest.
The blonde man enters the study to inform Eisel that someone important has arrived without notice.
Shocked by the news, Eisel wonders who could possibly be visiting when she had no scheduled appointments. She concludes that for the butler to interrupt her work, the visitor must be someone of great significance. Dressed in her finest gown, Eisel stands ready to meet her surprise visitor with a focused gaze.
Lord Byron appears with a sudden, sharp whip sounding, prompting Eisel to acknowledge his presence with formal surprise. Moving with a sudden, frantic rush sounding, she questions if he returned to share information he had forgotten.
The gray-haired man addresses her with full formality, using her title and name with a serious expression.
He decides to use her given name, while she internally finds his shift to casual familiarity quite sudden.
Byron explains that he felt compelled to clarify his position in person to ensure no further misunderstandings occur.
Eisel asks for clarification on what specific misunderstandings he is referring to between them.
With a sudden, gentle hold sounding, he takes her hand into his while preparing to make an admission. He reveals that a traumatic accident 5 years ago left him in a coma and caused significant memory loss.
Making a sudden, careful place sounding, he returns the silver cross while confessing he forgot its importance until now.
A sudden, quiet calm settles over her as she listens to his explanation with polite detachment. Byron admits he kept an identical token, knowing it was precious despite being unable to recall why. He describes his struggle to recover his memories as being as difficult as swimming in the deep ocean.
Eisel notes that his struggle to remember is no longer a factor in their current situation.
Letting out a sudden, soft smile sounding, she looks up at him with newfound warmth and kindness.
A sudden, joyful beam sounding reflects his relief as he returns her smile with genuine happiness.
Byron apologizes for his long absence and memory loss, expressing how much he wanted to find her again.
He gazes at her with a soft expression, hopeful that they can finally reconnect as they once intended.
Eisel observes his slightly awkward manner and realizes his memories have likely not fully returned.
He insists that his lack of memory is no excuse for failing to honor an important childhood promise. While he expresses deep regret for making her wait so long, Eisel attempts to interject and halt his apology.
He vows that his childhood vow remains sincere, while she gently tells him she appreciates the sentiment.
She firmly clarifies her new status as a countess, leaving the man visibly confused by her formal distance. With a sudden, proud straightened sounding, she asserts that she is now a reigning title holder in her own right. A sudden, dramatic done sounding underscores her revelation that she has already become engaged to another man. Narrative text explains that for centuries, noble women were prohibited from holding political power or succeeding their families.
Historical context details how ancient laws prevented daughters from inheriting titles and estates across the empire.
Empress Luisera eventually changed the course of history by convincing the leadership that women could be legitimate successors.
A new law allowed women to inherit family titles, provided they were married or officially engaged to a fiancé.
Although the conditions remained biased toward men, the Empress had to accept this compromise as a significant step forward.
With a sudden, quiet open sounding, the gray-haired man prepares to respond to the shocking news of her engagement. He stands frozen in place, completely dumbfounded by the revelation that he arrived too late.
Letting out a sudden, soft "oh" sounding, Eisel reflects on her assumption that his childhood proposal was merely a joke.
A memory of a younger Archduke Byron appears, highlighting the sincerity of the promise made when they were children.
She admits that because they hadn't met in 15 years, she was certain he had forgotten about her.
Reeling from the news, the man struggles to maintain his composure while Eisel asks if he is unwell.
His focused gaze betrays his internal turmoil as he processes the loss of his childhood promise.
Eisel looks on with a mixture of surprise and concern at his intense reaction to her engagement. Byron demands to know when her engagement began, and she reveals it happened 2 years ago.
The gray-haired man gives a sudden, sharp stare sounding while demanding to know the identity of her fiancé.
Eisel reveals her fiancé as Louis Widgoed, the second son of Count Barrington Widgoed. The man lets out a sudden, low mumble sounding as he questions the name, prompting her to ask for a pardon. He notes that an engagement of 2 years suggests the wedding must be taking place very soon.
Eisel expresses her doubts, causing the man to wonder why the marriage hasn't happened yet.
She explains that her schedule is currently overwhelmed with work obligations. Giving a sudden, quick blink sounding of her red eyes, narrative text clarifies the engagement to Louis was a necessity to inherit her father's title.
Historical context explains that Count Widgoed had 2 sons, with Louis being the shy and reserved younger sibling.
Portraiture of a young Louis reflects the efforts to mold him into a more desirable successor.
In a playful memory, Eisel makes a sudden, successful catch sounding as she lures Louis into joining her business ventures.
Narrative text describes Louis as having a very quiet and calm disposition.
He and Eisel were of a similar age, facilitating their eventual arrangement.
Most importantly, the dark-haired boy was noted for his high level of intelligence.
Eisel overworked him as her secretary, making his acceptance of a fake engagement a natural escape from her demands.
Now a grown man, Louis apparently constantly seeks freedom from the woman he views as a manipulative captor.
Byron expresses his relief at the situation, leaving Eisel confused by his sudden change in tone.
He tells her to ignore his previous comment and asks the Countess to share any positive updates she may have.
Byron promises to advocate for their contract in Parliament and thanks her for her significant dedication.
With a sudden rhythmic step sounding, she offers to escort him to the door.
At the entrance, he thanks her for the meeting and for agreeing to his proposal, hoping for a favorable outcome.
He expresses his desire to see the Countess much more frequently in the near future.
She privately disagrees, feeling that such frequent contact is entirely unnecessary. A sudden, sharp clack sounding of the door handle signals the arrival of another person as she lets out a surprised sound.
Her red eyes widen in surprise as she looks toward the opening door. Louis Widgoed enters the room, surprised to find Eisel standing by the door. With a sudden, soft shut sounding of the door, he notes that she was supposed to be enjoying her day off.
Byron's expression turns grave as he recognizes the name of his competition.
Making a sudden, quick turn sounding, Eisel looks back toward her best. Byron stares intensely at the newcomer, his yellow eyes filled with calculation.
Louis looks back with a confused and uncertain expression, wondering who the guest is.
Byron releases a sudden, heavy glare sounding as he sizes up the man claiming to be the fiancé.
Louis begins a sudden, nervous tremble sounding as he feels the weight of the Archduke's intense gaze. A metaphorical standoff occurs between the two men while Eisel finds herself caught in the middle of their tension.
Byron makes a sudden, slow raised sounding of his hand as he formally introduces himself to Louis.
The dark-haired man nervously stammers out his name in response.
The two men engage in a formal handshake, though the atmosphere remains thick with animosity.
Byron wears a sudden, dark smirk sounding as he maintains his hold on the younger man.
Louis feels a sudden, cold chill sounding down his spine as he senses the hidden malice behind the smile.
With a sudden, forceful pull sounding, Byron brings their hands closer together.
He gives a sudden, firm grip sounding to Louis's hand, leaving the secretary shocked by the sudden display of power.
Byron mentions hearing that he is the fiancé, while Louis shakily confirms it and asks how the two men are acquainted with a sudden, tight squeeze, shake, and quiver sounding.
Eisel watches the interaction with a flat expression, wondering what could possibly be warranting such a reaction.
Louis shifts his attention to Eisel, explaining that he brought the documents she had been pressuring him to complete.
Making a sudden, quick pass sounding of a brown envelope, she is surprised by his unexpected speed. Byron watches them interact with a sudden, intense stare, sounding his suspicion evident.
Eisel thanks Byron for his trust and expresses her hope for good news as they conclude their business.
Byron remains silent, a subtle smile playing on his lips as he prepares to depart.
He reflects on how his self-control has failed him, muttering bitterly about the existence of a fiancé. Letting out a sudden, heavy ha sounding, he closes his eyes to hide his frustration. Under the light of a crescent moon, Byron resolves that he still has a chance to win her back if the marriage never occurs.
Lewis stammers that he only arrived to deliver a specific document to her.
Eisel questions why he would lie to her after all the years they have known one another.
She rants that his behavior is suspicious because he usually ignores her and stays in his room, yet now he is delivering work well before the deadline.
Louis defends himself by claiming that people can change their routines and he simply finished early because of the pleasant weather. She asks if he is telling the truth or if he has caused some kind of trouble, while he asks what he would ever gain by lying to her.
Louis expresses his disappointment at her lack of trust, suggesting he deserves praise for his speed instead of suspicion.
Eisel apologizes for her doubts and admits that she has been feeling edgy and anxious as her time runs out.
Louis makes a sudden rhythmic step sounding as he huffs and walks away while she begs for his forgiveness.
Pausing at the door with a sudden, loud creak sounding, he declares himself a petty person who should just go home.
Eisel watches him go with a worried expression, feeling terrible for upsetting him.
A private thought notes that she has never seen the Countess appear so flustered before.
Letting out a sudden, soft chuckle sounding, the black-haired man notes how rare it is for the usually unflappable Eisel to show such an expression. He reaches up to adjust his collar with a focused expression. His blue eyes glow with a cold, piercing intensity in the evening light.
Giving a sudden, sharp glance sounding, the man demands to know what the hidden observer is doing there.
A figure in a dark purple cloak emerges from behind a tree with a sudden, heavy step sounding.
The cloaked individual explains that they were worried something happened because he was late for their meeting.
The black-haired man casually brushes his hair back as he listens to the report.
While Louis looks out from the window above, Byron stands alone in the garden below.
The man's face is cast in shadow as he looks down from his high vantage point. Bringing a hand to his face with a sudden, quiet, lower sounding, he watches his rival with intense focus.
Narrative text describes Byron's fiery golden eyes as being like those of a beast glaring at a rival.
Wearing a sudden, dark smirk sounding, Louis confirms the rumors about Byron leading the Black Lions and decides to assign him a different role. The cloaked figure warns that changing his role will be difficult because Byron is already a central figure in their current plans.
Louis addresses the subordinate by the name Calzac. He issues a direct command to change the outcome regardless of the difficulty. With a single red eye glowing from beneath the hood, Calzac gives his affirmation. Louis smiles as his own eye glows a matching sinister red while confirming that everything is understood. A pair of elegant shoes makes a sudden, rhythmic step sounding as a woman descends a staircase. With a sudden, soft swish sounding of her red gown, Eisel appears in full formal attire. She moves forward with a sudden, quick dash sounding as she spots a familiar face. A blonde woman startles the Countess by suddenly appearing directly in her path. Lancia pulls Eisel into a hug with a sudden, joyful nuzzle, snuggle, and squeal sounding, while Eisel points out they only saw each other 4 days ago. Lancia insists that 4 days is far too long and expresses her desire to spend every single day with her friend.
Eisel notes with a smile that Lancia's father is always begging her to take his daughter in for this exact reason.
Narrative text describes how Count Ermund eventually gave up trying to stop Lancia from following Eisel around as she did when they were children.
The Count is reportedly filled with dread that Lancia might be the last of their family line because she is uninterested in marriage or any of her suitors.
Eisel considers his worry absurd given that Lancia is as lovely as a doll and possesses many admirers.
Lancia dismisses the topic of her father and tells Eisel to simply ignore his complaints. The scene shifts to the grand architecture of the palace as Lancia agrees to move on. A sudden, sharp clack sounding of silverware underscores Lancia's comment about how long it has been since they shared a meal.
Eisel looks up in surprise and asks if it has truly been that long. Lancia confirms that she honestly cannot recall the last time they were able to sit down together for a meal.
Eisel privately agrees while her friend gives a sudden, joyful beam sounding.
Lancia asks if something is wrong with her work, noting that even her own father is rarely home because he is so overwhelmed.
Eisel focuses on cutting into her steak as the conversation turns toward business matters.
Narrative text explains that as Duke Basquiela's business grew, House Ermund was eventually brought under its influence. Historical context notes that Count Ermund relocated his estate to the capital, which allowed Lancia to continue living there into her adulthood.
Lancia mentions hearing that the task given to the Duke was intense and observes that Eisel looks visibly tired.
Making a sudden, slow lift sounding of her fork, Eisel explains that the work was standard, but the circumstances took a bizarre turn.
Lancia responds with a thoughtful hum. The scene shifts to the elegant and quiet decor of the sitting room.
The discussion turns toward a worrying shortage of recent tea leaf shipments.
Lancia explains that poor weather is the primary reason the crops are not thriving.
The blonde woman asks if Eisel has already finished her previous gift of tea.
A voice notes that while some remains, they are rationing the supply due to the shortage. Eisel's hand firmly grasps a decorative gold-rimmed teacup.
The silver-haired woman takes a quiet sip of her drink as she listens.
Narrative text explains that the leaves have been preserved for years to come.
Lancia looks confused and asks for clarification.
Blushing deeply, Lancia declares she would marry Eisel if she were a man.
Letting out a sudden, soft sip sounding, Eisel flatly tells her friend to just focus on her tea.
Lancia finds Eisel's flustered reaction to her compliments incredibly charming and cute.
Letting out a sudden, quiet sniffle sounding, Lancia complains of boredom and her parents' constant absence.
She expresses a deep longing for the simplicity and joy of the past.
After reminiscing about their childhood trips to the market, Lancia has a sudden realization. Leaning in with focus, Lancia brings up a specific question regarding House Basquiela.
Eisel asks for more details regarding the noble Faroe.
A memory flashes back to school days where a girl was warned against low-class associations. Lancia reminds her of Lord Gerald being exiled several years prior after receiving his title.
The blonde woman drops the shocking news that Gerald died just a few days ago.
Details emerge that he was found dead in his bedroom, apparently passing away quietly. While some cite long-term illness, rumors suggest a much more sinister cause of death. Whispers suggest that a man named Raven was actually the one responsible for the murder.
Eisel is taken aback by the dark accusation that Raven killed his own father.
Rumors claim Raven either switched the medicine or was seen leaving the bedroom before the death. Lancia notes that people believe the rumors because of the pair's famously toxic relationship. Making a sudden quick whip sounding of her tea, Eisel recalls they lacked a typical relationship. She stares down at her drink with a somber and reflective expression.
Shadows of the past depict a tense and dark confrontation between two figures.
A dark-haired man shouts in anger during a heated and violent argument.
Eisel dismisses the news, noting they are unlikely to ever cross paths again.
Lancia asks if the tragedy bothers her at all.
Eisel firmly denies feeling even the slightest bit of concern.
A private thought confirms that whatever happens to Raven is of no personal interest to her. Narrative text describes the historical tendency for people to fear a coming apocalypse. Monsters and a new cult emerge as the world faces strange and relentless threats. Desperate citizens begin funneling their gold and wealth into these religious organizations.
Eisel stands at the center of the movement, appearing as a saintly and distinctive leader.
Making a sudden, loud shout and yell sounding, an old man warns that the end is near. He points to the freezing weather and crop failures as signs of the coming judgment. Making a sudden, sharp swish sounding of his hand, he claims judgment is no cause for alarm. He promises salvation for his followers through the intervention of the Great Akrata. Letting out a sudden, loud woo and cheer sounding, the crowd responds with overwhelming fervor. Narrative text suggests that God cannot personally intervene for every single individual. Making a sudden, graceful raise sounding of her fan, Eisel watches the scene unfold. Crowds cheer, driven by either genuine desperation or hidden personal motivations. Making a sudden, rhythmic step sounding, the preacher brings out supplies to win over the believers. Letting out a sudden, rhythmic woo sounding, the crowd reaffirms their unwavering faith.
Making a sudden, rhythmic cheer sounding, the man tells the faithful to wait for their savior.
Crowds move with a sudden, quick dash, sounding as a voice directs them to come up one by one for grain and clothes. The bearded preacher gives a sudden, sharp glance, sounding as a bag overflows with gold, pearls, and jewels. Letting out a sudden, quick turn sounding and a hearty chuckle, the man welcomes the new believers to the Church of Kelium. While the crowd gives a sudden, quiet murmur and mutter sounding, the man explains that they practice polytheism and are free to follow other faiths. Standing beside the silver-haired woman, the red-haired man asks for her opinion and where she managed to find such a compelling leader. Narrative text notes that the man possesses a rare gift for influence and would have been a successful politician.
Eisel shocks her companion by revealing that the preacher was once a professional con artist.
The red-haired man explains how the man ran a massive pyramid scheme abroad before being caught at the border and brought here.
When asked if the man will attempt to flee with the money, Eisel confirms he values his life too much to try.
Narrative text explains that after being caught and tortured previously, the man has accepted his new, well-paid role.
Eisel tells the red-haired man to take a closer look at their current situation.
Letting out a sudden, hearty chuckle sounding, the red-haired man notes the con artist actually enjoys being a cult leader. Eisel gives a sudden, sharp snap sounding of her fan, expressing her confidence in the man's performance. The red-haired man questions why she's going through so much trouble when gold is so easily traded for grain. Letting out a sudden, quiet tap sounding of her fan against her chin, Eisel maintains a mysterious and knowing expression. Narrative text describes the ancient deity Kelium as evil, leading its treacherous followers to be branded as heretics. Legal context explains that Eisel's businesses were legitimate, yet those using religious puppets were spared from harsh treatment.
Wearing a sudden, dark smirk sounding, Eisel describes her elaborate plan as a form of insurance.
Letting out a sudden, rhythmic tap sounding of her fan, Eisel argues that desperation and hunger cause riots, not the end of the world.
She explains that her actions prevent the Empire from having to divert monster-fighting soldiers to quell civilian uprisings. With her red eyes fixed ahead, Eisel notes that human nature is far more grounded in reality than most realize.
Amidst a sudden, quiet crackle and pop sounding of the fire, Eisel explains that people prioritize a deity that provides food over one that only offers faith. Narrative text illustrates how providing hope, food, and warmth serves as the ultimate tool to prevent social collapse.
A narrative bubble notes that the disapproval or accusations of other religious groups are of no concern to their goals.
The plan intends for the cult to eventually dissolve once the immediate threat of rioting has passed. The red-haired man reports that several nobles have recently begun approaching him with various requests.
He notes that their interest has shifted from buying supplies to business collaborations and accusations of illegal activity.
Eisel expresses her disdain for the shamelessness of nobles who now want her to hand over control of the cult.
Narrative text describes the extreme scarcity of grain and the exhaustion of the luxury goods the nobility once enjoyed.
Eisel privately considers how the shortage of tobacco leaves must be driving the smoking nobles to the brink of insanity.
She instructs her companion to open a warehouse for the rival church to win their gratitude and loyalty through grain.
The red-haired man questions if the move is intended to leverage the church's strong ties to the upper nobility.
Internal logic suggests that winning over the church is more efficient than dealing with every greedy noble individually.
Narrative text confirms that the church will serve as a protective barrier against the pressure from high-ranking nobles.
Eisel notes that she had always intended to share her grain reserves with other religious organizations.
Eisel's red eye opens with focused intensity.
Children in the background give a sudden, joyful squeal, chatter, and clamor sounding.
Letting out a sudden, soft flutter sounding of her hair, Eisel wonders if the common people could survive the world's end.
Giving a sudden, sharp swish sounding of his cloak, the red-haired man turns and begins to walk away.